Good day, everyone. My name's Ryan, and together with Aaron, we are the RA21 podcast, a really adult show. So today we're going to talk a little bit about debt, DEBT, a taboo topic that most families don't talk about. And on the show today, we've got Stephanie from Steffi Condo, someone who's like very in touch with property and very suitable to talk about debts today. We're talking about like home loans and everything. So, Stephanie, how are you today?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm good today. Yeah. So happy to be part of this podcast, and I'm also here to learn. Yeah.
Awesome.
I like how Steffi is like so modest.
Yeah,
She's like so modest. Hi everyone, but actually
Yeah.
she's like my conversations with Steffi, right, guys? I always do find that she's quite she's actually she knows what she's talking about lah, which is quite rare. Whenever I talk to anyone who is in property, like the things that she says, right, is really not something which you hear quite often from people who just focus on selling. So I think that's why we both me and Ryan reached out to her and asked whether she was actually available, to do this podcast, and we're both very happy to have you today, Steffi.
Yeah, same. Because I've been following your podcast value from a podcast, so I'm super happy to be here, be contributing something of value. So thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
awesome. So before we continue, so I just want to quickly ask, Aaron, how are you doing?
Great. Actually, I've been doing extremely well. Like the last 2 weeks. Right now I'm taking a little bit of a vacation, which is quite good. It's a long time coming since like for the last 2.5 years. So I'm enjoying right now. Recording it not at my own home, but it's fun. It's great to see how technology can I can record anywhere and I still can get stuff done even though I'm not like at back home lah. Yeah, but it's fun. Definitely getting in touch with the grassroots around Southeast Asia. So I'm really like seeing like the impact of the investments that I've made lah on crypto and things like that. So I definitely do feel the better consensus when I'm out in the grassroots. So it's been fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy
How about
for
you,
you to
Ryan?
be able to be like traveling around the world, taking a break. Yeah, I'm on the other end. As usual, I'm just drowning at
Yeah,
work.
that's
And yeah, I'm just as usual, I've just moved into a new place. Instead of like buying the new place, I decided to just rent the new place for now, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you renting the entire place?
It's actually just a studio, a
Or
400 square feet studio. Yeah.
I see. That's nice.
Just a very small, humble place.
Yeah, but
Nothing
you have
extravagant.
Well, so long as you don't rent it from Airbnb lah.
Yeah, but
Oh, yeah, the other day we were just talking about like Airbnb prices. Aaron was like looking around. It was insane, those prices. Aaron, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was actually like thinking whether I want to like, go to KL for a little while for 1 month, right? So I searched the Airbnb like listings in KL. Then in KLCC, right smack in the middle, right? The most of the listings, I think they kind of think I'm like a rich white man. Because like the listings over there are talking like 30 days lease, right? It's like 5,000 ringgit.
wow.
then I thought, okay lah, maybe I give them a benefit of doubt lah. Maybe I'm living like in the middle of like the twin towers of Malaysia lah. So I asked Ryan where's he's renting and where he's staying, right? So okay, I searched that same exact area, right? Then the result came even more expensive.
It's a double my rent.
Yeah, double his rent. So it's like, okay, I guess I'll just have to search slowly lah. But I'm pretty sure I can, if I ever go to KL, I can find good deals lah. I'm not too concerned.
Right. So looking at like how all the rentals going up like crazy, I would assume the rental market's getting like super hot and nobody's going for like buying new houses. And maybe would that be because of like debt? Let's get right into the topic. The first topic. We're gonna talk a little bit about debt. Why is it a taboo? Is it a friend or foe? Is debt bad? I personally I think that debt is kind of like something it's a financial instrument that can be good or bad depending on how you use it, but it's so misunderstood and so misinformed in the sense that people fear the unknown. So what do you think, Stephanie?
Oh, okay. So coming from the property industry, it really depends on the person. And I realized that from my experience, the wealthier the person is, the more they like that. And those that are at the middle income level or the lower middle income level, they are more a bit of afraid and different reasons than how the rich or the wealthy uses debt. So in the property sector, you get to use debt like in the form of mortgage, which is what some gurus say is using other people's money to build wealth, to buy even more property, not just one, but two, three, and then so on and more, whereas,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think in the property industry, it's more like a friend if you know how to use it well.
Definitely. I
But
would
if
say
not,
like
consequences, you'll end up having your property repossessed and having to go onto auction property,
I
auction
see.
market. Yeah.
I like how you came from a property point of view, because in like equities and crypto, right? Usually debt comes in the form of leverage, which me and Aaron we are very familiar with, and that's why we kind of like don't touch it. But you hear stories about people getting wiped out. You hear people getting margin called and that ended
Yeah.
up having to pay like more than 3 times of whatever they actually initially borrowed of. But yeah, Aaron, what do you think about that? Coming from the equity side of things.
Um, you see, the thing about I think what's definitely touched on today, because she's from the property sector, right, is that a lot of people in property tend to use leverage because in most cases, hard property is a pretty big purchase object, lah. And in most people's personal finance, right, when you talk about property purchase, it tends to take up about 30 to 40% of your cash flow every month to buy a home. And I think what Steph says is pretty right, and that is if the richer you are and the wealthier you are, right, you tend to actually take on more debt to ensure that you can control more assets, rather than using your own money. Because generally when you are wealthier, right, what usually happens is that financial institutions start to open up very custom and tailor-made products for you, right, in order for you to leverage. So most cases when you go to a bank, and actually we'll save this for a topic later, to answer the question, I would say that from my understanding, right, and my observation is that in most cases, all greatest fortunes in the world, right, the greatest fortunes in the world have both been made and destroyed using debt. So whenever you look at this debt equation, there's always a creditor and there's always a debtor, and there is always a winner at the end of the equation, because when you create debt, right, there is someone using it and there's someone collecting. The question is, in this game of debt, right, if you are the person using debt, can you create more value than whatever the person is charging? That's really the main question that you have to answer. And if the answer is yes, then it becomes a friend. But if the answer is no, if you're struggling paying off like minimum sums, for credit card, you're like stretched to the max, you're owing like credit cards like 6 months, 8 months of your annual income, of your monthly income, right? And then you are just paying bare minimum, then it becomes a very huge foe lah. Then it's very, very hard to get out of. Yeah.
It ties back to just very good personal finance, right?
Yeah,
In the
pretty much
sense.
like I would say that and we'll talk about this later in the few topics later, and that is that always comes back to your personal finance in the beginning stages of your wealth building. But then as you start to mature, once you start to get wealthier, as what Steph says, right, then it's no longer about just personal finance. You're actually looking at that, right, as a instrument in finance, right, to actually grow your wealth larger, because that allows you to take on more projects, bigger projects. And then you also talk about risk management, like how do you like use that not just in your personal capacity but in a bigger scale, you see.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, provided we have the skills and knowledge to use it, right?
Yeah, and in most cases, what I've noticed is that wealthy people, even if let's say they don't have the skills and knowledge, they can always find people who know how to do it. Then they'll pay for usually like consultants, and they'll just pay for the people who are good at it. Then
Mm.
that's why they build an organization. Then they have a CFO. Then the CFO will be the one handling all this like financial matters. Usually in a very huge like corporation, or even like wealthy like the upper echelons of like wealth management, right? Usually the family office, there's always a few people, right, who are very, very good at looking at financial instruments, and that's how they manage the debt. So coming back to the question, is it friend or foe, or is it bad? I would say that the biggest destructions of wealth that I've seen, right, tends to come from people who overextended and over leveraged. I mean, we see a lot of examples in the last 2 weeks in the crypto space through the Terra ecosystem, right? People like borrow a lot of money, and they really overextended, and then unfortunately, they nothing to laugh about lah, but they did lose fortunes, and it's very very hard to come back from. It's very hard to come back from owing large sums of money, I would say. So I think end of the day, this is why we want to talk about topic, because we feel that it needs to be there needs to be a spotlight in knowing how to utilize this instrument. And Ryan is very right in saying that it's a very taboo subject, because I think it's not in the Southeast Asian culture to actually want to always talk about I owe tang or I owe money, right?
Yeah, it's not something you actually bring up to the table during your family gathering or something.
Yeah, and usually people don't educate each other on this, if you
Yes,
notice.
definitely. It's a very misinformed sector of like finance, I would say. For
Yeah.
like what Stephanie mentions just now, the lower and middle income families, they tend to fear debt a little more, which I think like this kind of like financial education on like debt would serve these people well. What do you think about that, Stephanie?
People avoiding debt actually brought consequences to themselves, which is quite not of advantage consequences. Like if you never borrow or if you never get into debt, how are you able to build a credit profile for yourself so that in the future where you really want to buy a house, how are banks gonna evaluate you? How are they gonna assess whether you are a good paymaster or not? So I find that excessively avoiding debts are bad as well. But however, having said that, for those first timer, there's actually a lot of tools available online to actually gauge how much debt you can get, or to look at your affordability, your eligibility. So you can easily go to Property Guru website to look for those calculator where you get to calculate your affordability, your eligibility before you really decide to take on the debts.
Definitely, there's so many tools online today that can help you decide whether you can or cannot take on debt. And in the end of the day, this just points back to good personal finance, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So why is debt important to your personal finance? Maybe Aaron, you would like to start on this a little?
Okay, I think I've said this before in some of my previous podcasts with the Ringgit to Dollar, just shout out to them. And that is, if you were to look at a balance sheet, right? Let's say you look at your personal finance balance sheet. There you have first your income statement. Then after your income statement, you go on to the next one, and that you see a balance sheet. And in balance sheet, it's usually divided into two, all right? Assets and liabilities. Okay, the thing is, in terms of wealth building, most people in the personal finance space and most people who do, introduction to finance, they always like to talk about assets. I buy assets, I fund these assets, etc., which is 50% of the equation. The thing is, liabilities, which is pretty much debt, right, constitutes 50% of the other side of the equation. And that is how do you, manage the other side of the equation. So I've said this before and I will reiterate. If you don't understand and don't how to master debt and credit in your life, you are literally giving up 50% of the efficiency, right, in your own wealth building. And that is something which I find that, as what Steph has mentioned, right, if you're very excessively avoiding the usage of debt and credit in your life, then generally what I've noticed is you simply will not be as efficient as you could be if you know how to use it. Because I was in that particular category where I try to avoid that my entire life, and then once I started to understand and wrap my head around it, right, I have realized that if you know how to use that to your advantage, it actually creates a lot of opportunities, and it allows you to actually make decisions, right, which actually benefits you a lot better, right, if you avoid it. It opens up doors, I would say. It increases, it gives you a lot of like tools which you would not have otherwise had if you don't use it, right? A very good example I can give is, for example, okay, if you have like, let's say you have cash 100% to buy a house today, okay? You have like, let's say 100% cash to buy a house today. The question, right, you want to ask is, do you want to use 100% of your house today, bearing in mind, let's say you are 35, right, to buy 100% cash and buy a house today, or would you want to borrow money and buy and keep the cash and use the cash to invest somewhere else?
Yeah,
You get what I
definitely
mean?
go for the latter option.
Okay,
Yeah.
so for some people, right, they will want to do 100%, but let's talk about the why you would want to, let's say, do the second option. If you go to the second option, right, generally you basically come to understanding if you are in your mid-30s and you have the ability to actually pay 100% down for a house. The question is, why do you really need to do that? Because end of the day, in terms of the utility of the home, right? In terms of utility, it really all it does, right? It just gives you a shelter above your head, correct? And if you think about it, there is no real need for you at the age of 35, when you are still working, right, to pay 100%, right, of your house off immediately. Because generally, if you are well insured, you have insurance, right? You have life insurance, you have like hospitalization insurance. Even if you are unable to work due to an illness or sickness, right, you can actually de-risk that through you having an insurance policy. Then they will give you cash and then you can pay off the house, right? And then if you go 100%, then you are locking up your options in this asset, and then you're unable to use the other money, for other opportunities. So I mean, it comes down to like your personal finance, right? And then why is it important? I would say it's important to understand, because if you are able to understand how to utilize that, it gives you a lot of options apart from just making very binary decisions where you just like, okay, I'm just not going to borrow any money. I'm just going to like create assets, which is not too wrong, but I would say that it's quite inefficient. It is quite inefficient. If in my experience looking at personal balance sheet, right, I would say that people who understand that and can utilize that better, right, I can tell you, they don't move faster by 10 or 20%. They move faster by triple and 3 and 4 times the speed than people who don't use that.
Yeah, that's really like the notion that I got when I read this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think that everyone begins their personal finance journey with this book, but the fact that he started with like the chart of like an asset and like debt, it was quite in a sense it's like a mindset shift for me to actually learn how to utilize debt and actually embrace debt as like part of my personal finance. In that sense, I used to be very apprehensive about using credit cards or even like taking loans, because my experience with loans was quite painful, which I will go into a bit later. But and I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but it was looking back at it, right, it was just really bad personal finance decisions where I took up a loan where the monthly installment is more. It's like a little bit too much for the salary that I was earning back then. And I wasn't actually effectively able to live life, and I had to live like a very frugal life. I had to eat or not eat some days, So it was quite difficult, and I became like quite apprehensive of that at that point in time. But when I started to take charge of my personal finances and like started to learn about that, it's actually something that like you mentioned, it's like super dynamic. It's not a binary thing. You could take that to fund something, and does that the thing that you actually fund is productive in the sense that it's an asset that creates value, or is it something that devalues like a car, right? So Stephanie, how what do you think about like the interaction between like debt and like, personal finances?
Personally, I feel that it's a tool that people can make use of to get their to get an asset for themselves. And yeah, because where else can you get buy a house? I mean, it is not that I know of that I can get a 90% loan to buy equities, to buy stock or crypto, right? So I
Yeah.
feel that, yeah, I feel that that's the best choice I have now, lah, at least at this level. If I mean, for a person, average person like me, where I'm not rich, I have nothing else as collateral.
I mean, even if we don't talk about property, right? We talk about just vehicles, cars, and motorcycles in general. In Singapore, I think you can do without a car because your public transport is so advanced. But in Malaysia, if you don't have a car, you're basically stuck. You can't go anywhere outside of your home, basically. And I think like purchases for like a car, while it's an unproductive asset, it devalues, but it's something that Malaysians do appreciate because we drive a lot. We drive 40 kilometers across KL just to get to work sometimes, and it's something that's really needed. And for people like me, average people like me, I feel like this is like a quite a big purchase, depending on like what kind of car you're buying. But like you have to fork out at least a good 40,000-50,000 ringgit just to buy a car, and in cash if you're buying it in cash. But like where on earth do you find this kind of money in a 27-year-old's pocket? I mean, sure, some people, high flyers, they earn that much, but um, the majority of people, like, we can't just poof, there you go, 50K. And that's where the loans come in. It enables people to own things that are really expensive, right, Stephanie?
Yes, and actually, like just now, I was digging out, for some statistic, like why people got into bankruptcy, but I actually saw that one of the top two reasons is actually because of higher purchase, which is the car lah. So personally, from my experience dealing with buyers, especially those that are having some difficulties to get loan, right? Mortgage, is because of higher purchase commitment. So actually, it's a yes and no for me. Because just now I was digging up data about like the latest insolvency statistic for Malaysians, like what are the top few reasons. Actually, the higher purchase for car is the second highest contributing factor of insolvency lah. So I feel that personally, from my experience of dealing with, most of them are because of over high commitment on the car repayment every month. So I feel that if possible, especially for young people starting out, you need a car. If you have the choice, go for a cheaper car so that you don't overcommit yourself, or like reduce your ability to get loan in the future.
I love that.
That really hits home, because for me, I was like a 25-year-old, 24-year-old when I actually bought like a brand new car. It wasn't cash, so I had to take a loan. And I wanted to buy a secondhand Myvi, which was like 30-40K, and then wasn't too expensive. But my dad somehow insisted that I just got like a new car, like a new Honda City. So I drive a Honda City full spec somehow. And
Oh.
it was like 70,000. Wow, my God. That point of time, I used 33% of my 1/3 of my salary to service that every month. At that point of time, my salary was still kind of low at that point, but it was hell, man, every day.
Wow, that's
and
terrible.
and looking back, I just regret it so much. But like, I'm grateful that I kind of like pulled through. And I do enjoy driving the car. So there's like, could you say like it's really not worth it? I don't know. But the only thing I know is that at that point in time, I was this close to giving up on the debt and selling the car, because it was just too much and too painful for me to actually pay off the monthly installments. And
You see.
it goes back to whether debt is like friend or foe. And it really has something to do with good personal finance management. You have to actually know how much you're going to pay and how much of that you actually need to actually sustain your daily life, and maybe set a bit of money aside for savings and investments, like that kind of stuff. And I'm quite surprised, Stephanie, you said the top two reasons why people go bankrupt is because of higher purchase loans.
Yes, the first one being personal loan, and then the second one is
Well, Aaron, I think we just ticked off the top two reasons why people go bankrupt in Malaysia today. If for viewers that don't know, I have a higher purchase loan, and Aaron took up like a personal loan, which we'll dive deeper into later.
Do
But
you want me
yeah.
to chime in on the what you guys have mentioned just now?
Yeah, of course, go for it, man.
Okay, I want to basically just summarize, right, for the listeners out there. Essentially, when you take that, right, and then you hear stories of Ryan and you hear stories from Steph, right, end of the day, right, you have to go back to the question. When you take out that, what are you buying? What are you using the money for? Agree? Because essentially, if you are using this debt, right, to buy an item that can return you usually two things. It usually needs to give you back, right? Number one, more time, right? If you, let's say, run a business, all right, you want to move your business faster and accelerate the speed of your business growth. You take on that, then you hire people, and this person can generate more revenue for you and higher return than whatever that interest is. That interest that you're paying, then it might be a wise decision to do so because it get you time. So usually, right, when you buy that, right, and sometimes when you, let's say, for example, you do, you're working, then let's say you're running a business, then your laptop is like dying already. It's like pretty much like need CPR. It's really like dying, right? I say you can use your debt, right, and then buy a brand new PC, and this PC gives you no problems. It runs 10 times faster, and you work faster. So in a way, right, you're using that now to give you more time, today, rather than the alternative, right? You save for the next 2 years just to be able to buy this PC, then you go from there. Agree?
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
end of the day, you are buying something, right, to get something today, now, okay? Because based on the amount that you're borrowing, right, you can just move faster. So in a way, right, when you borrow money to buy something that gets you faster, you are buying time, right? You're getting time today, and then how you utilize that time from then on will determine whether or not is it a good purchase or not. Right. The second thing is that when you are buying something, right, you also need to come to the perspective of whether or not you're getting your money's worth for the amount that you're borrowing. Like what Steph say, higher purchase and personal loans, right? I would say that most of the time, I I can tell you that sometimes I do get Instagram followers asking me whether or not it makes sense to borrow money to buy Rolex watches.
What? For
Okay,
real?
okay. Yeah, I do get, messages like this asking me whether or not is it a wise decision. Okay, look, borrowing money, right, to buy things like that, especially when there's not much utility, right, it really boils back down to whether or not you need it. I've been pretty much, my go-to watch has been a G-Shock. Okay, I've used it for like 10 years and it never breaks, it never dies, and, as much as I like watches, right, end of the day, I don't really foresee borrowing money to buy stuff like that. The return me more money and more time as compared to if I buy assets. So now I flip the equation now, Ryan. Instead of using the money to buy a car, which is 70,000 ringgit, right? If you had borrowed that money, and let's say what's your interest rate? Your interest rate is about how many percent? 5-6%?
2.4.
Okay, your interest rate on the car loan is 2.4%. What if you use that money, right, at 2.4% at a payback of 10 years, and they allow you to buy Tesla?
You mean a Tesla car or a Tesla
Tesla
stock?
stock.
See, that's a huge difference. But yeah, that
And that
if
that
Tesla
that
stock's gonna go 10x and my interest rate is gonna be 2.5 or 2.4 for the next foreseeable future, like how many years? 5 years?
yeah.
It's really no-brainer.
Yeah, so I mean that comes down to the perspective of what Stephanie was trying to say, right? Because like in many cases, right, when you take on debt to buy, right, and she says that there's no other asset that allows you to borrow 90%, right? It's because in many ways, right, banks are not stupid, all right? They will only lend you money, let's say, and usually allow you to borrow 90, 95, and in some cases, 100%, right, of the asset that you're wanting to buy is because they know that there is collateral value, so they allow you to borrow, and I think you have to understand that when you take on debt, right, you really have to answer the fundamental question, which is, what are you buying? Okay, if you're buying things that really doesn't increase your efficiency at work, doesn't increase your time, doesn't increase your speed at doing things, right, then that is debt, right, which is what I call like fun play money debt lah. And I don't really think that you should see it as something which that will have a net positive value for you, because end of the day, look guys, you have to pay it off lah. End of the day, you have to pay off that, because the way the rule that works is that end of the day, that thing is not really yours until you pay it off. You still otang people end of the day. So if you can make it work for you, the formula is, if you borrow money, right, just make sure that whatever you're borrowing the money to buy it for, it can work for you, and then you can pay off the debt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I would say if you want to go for like a home or car, or anything that really you want to take a debt on, make sure that the utility actually serves you well. Like for cars, right? The only utility is to bring you from point A to point B comfortably. And as long as the car serves satisfy the utility, which is going from point A to point B, then you don't need to break your bank just to go buy like a brand new Tesla Model 3 or a BMW, Mercedes, yeah, a nice little Proton would do. So, it all ties back down to like good personal finance and understanding what you are using your debt for. All right.
Yep.
So we've covered like why do we actually use debt. We started with like why, and why is it actually important for people to understand and utilize it properly. So let's talk a little bit about what are the kinds of debts that we have on the market. We always hear about people talking about like higher purchase loans or like personal loans, home loans. In the equity space, we got like the margins, we got leverage in crypto. But is there like a very definitive I would say categorization for all these debts, Aaron?
Yes, I would say that what Steph mentioned, okay, there I would say that there's two main types of debt lah. Okay, and then basically the rest of the categories are just subsets of them. Okay, the first type of debt is what you call a secured loan, meaning you put up collateral and then the bank lends you the money based on the market value of the collateral that you're putting up. Mortgages fall under this category because usually when you want to buy a house wherever country you're in, right? The bank will come in, they'll assess the capital market cap of the mortgage, right? And then they will allow you to borrow as much as 90% of the asset or sometimes 100%. And whether or not you can qualify for the home loan also depends on the second variable, which is your income and your credit history, right? So this income and credit history falls under the category of unsecured loan, meaning, and these are where, right, things like personal loan, personal loan, credit card, then you're talking about all this like, things which don't really have a collateral, right? But basically comes from a premise, right, where it depends on your promise to pay the bank based on your, established income. So things like personal loan, which is why when Steph, you mentioned that the two biggest like default and bankruptcies often come from personal loans, right? It's because usually in personal loans it is an unsecured loan and there's no collateral. So usually, right, when you want to borrow money for things like personal loan, your interest rate is usually the high end of the spectrum because towards the bank, right, there is higher risk for them. Because assuming, let's say, a person were to default, right, because they have no collateral, unlike the house, they cannot just foreclose the house, they cannot just force sell the house, and they cannot take the house back. So they basically have to like just lawyer up, and depending on how much you owe, right, they'll come and chase after you. And in order to make sure that they don't actually like overcommit their personal loan to most people, each bank usually have a limit as to how much they can lend. So usually the limit is anywhere between 3 to 4 months. All right. So this is basically unsecured and secured. Now, if you go down to the secured loan parts, which basically a lot of people also get into trouble in, right? It's basically because these loans, right, they are also in most cases are mark to market loans. Okay, meaning, for example, let's say you were to buy a house at let's say you buy a house, let's say $1 million, you borrow 90%, 900,000. Assuming, let's say, something like a 0809 crash were to happen, okay, then suddenly the valuation of house, right, go from 1 million overnight, right, market value drop to 500,000. You still owe the bank 900,000. The 900,000 don't go away. All right, the bank will call you and say, okay, because the market value of this flat has dropped from 1 million to 500,000, the maximum that we can lend is 900K. Okay, can you please cough out another 450,000? If not, we'll sell the house and then we'll basically get a lawyer and basically claim on your asset in a personal capacity. Okay, now you think of this situation is bad, right? All right, now multiply this number of purchase by 5 to 6 times. All right, because this is exactly, right, what happened in the 08 and 09 crisis, where many people, right, they bought houses, right, at 1 million, and overnight the houses, right, some of them own 5 to 6, right, overnight the houses dropped by 50%. And they were told, right, to cough up $2 to $3 million instantly overnight, or the bank will force sell everything, and then they will just come after them and declare them bankrupt.
My God, that's insane. But that's really over leverage, isn't it?
It is. I would say that it is mark to market. I would say that from this story, you have to understand, right? It doesn't mean that you go secured loan, right? It doesn't mean that if you take a secured loan, means it is risk free, because people forget, even if it's a house, sometimes houses also can the valuation can drop also. It's not a never, that's what a lot of people forgot in 05, 06, right? They always thought that houses will never drop, houses will never default. Then 09, 08 happened, right? And then overnight the houses dropped by 50%. And I have people, right, in some of my friends are in Singapore who are that old, and they went through that 08, 09. I have a few of them, right, during that time, the banks literally called them up, and because they own like 3 to 4 houses, right, okay, the bank called them out and basically asked them to top up their margin because they got margin called on their homes in Singapore.
Wow.
Okay, and
Wow.
that was a real thing that happened. Okay, in 08, 09, I'm pretty sure it also happened in Malaysia. Okay, because if America happened, Singapore happened, I'm pretty sure Malaysia happened as well. So when you talk about debt, right, just understand that whatever kinds of debt are mark to market, credit card, interest free loan, cash flow loan, understand the fundamental principle is that when you own asset until you pay off the debt, that's a fundamental principle that you need to understand. Right, so that is why it's so important that when you take on loans, right, and when you utilize this asset, as what Steph say, make sure that when you buy something, right, make sure you do your due diligence before you jump on.
Yeah.
Steph, what do you think is prudent for a person who is buying property? First time buyer, like future buyers, what should they look out for when they buy a property? And also, like, what is some good guidelines for them to, in terms of debt financing?
Yeah, actually I find that there's quite a few traps in the property market, especially for first time home buyer. As I shared, it's really important to know your eligibility and your affordability, and if possible to borrow below your affordability instead of on your affordability level or above. Because I find that while interest rate was low, but now it has increased and may not stop there, it's important to really factor in the possibility of an increase in interest rate and whether when that happens you can still afford it. And another property trap that I find really that's still ongoing, even being brought up by the House Buyer Association in Malaysia, that there's this ongoing cashback things that is being offered, so-called to help stress on buying the first home, where they can zero down. They don't have to come up with down payment to buy a property, but be careful of that because you are in a way actually paying for that cashback, because a lot of people get into more debts because of cashback being offered by developer for developer who want to clear off their units. So I think that's a property trap that people need to know and which I see that a lot of people buy property for the reason of they need a house or they want to invest, but instead they want to get on more debt to clear up their bad debts. And in a way, it's like debt consolidation as well, of which I'm sure, Aaron, you are able to show as well on that, the debt consolidation.
Oh, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's very dangerous.
Yes, it is.
Well, that's like huge red flag. When you say that people don't have to like come out money down and then buy a house, right? That really screams like 0809 crisis, because back in those days, really people like they don't even have to show credit history, to borrow money to buy a house.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't even have to show that they have income. You can be unemployed and still buy a house, because of the political regulation there. So you're saying, Steph, that people right now they buy property because they don't even need a place to stay. They don't even need a place to like invest, but they're buying it because they want to do that consolidation.
Yeah, that's one of the reason, as well as for the cashback, because they need the cash to, like, let's say for capital of business and things like that lah. But that is very something to be careful of lah, I find, because those that don't have the personal finance knowledge can be lured into that. So I think the intention that you are getting the house is very important.
Actually, out of curiosity, Steph, when you say some people are doing this, is this something which is very uncommon, like in terms of percentage wise, like less than 1% of people actually do this, or is actually quite scary amount?
I would say it's getting more and more popular, especially with purchase, but it's not very often talked about because actually it's quite a gray area. Actually, banks are trying to control it, but I find that banks also have their own KPI, like how much they are able to sell outright. So I
Yeah.
think it's a supply and demand thing. The reason people can into all this is because they see the potential of making profit, like as a way to get more money. But little do they know they actually have to pay back one. This cashback is not free. On SPA, on the sales purchase agreement, you are buying something, let's say 1 million, whereas the real value is only, let's say, 600,000. So you're actually getting more debt, which is like 400K more debt than you actually need.
Wow.
Yeah. So and in a way you are kind of like manipulating the bank or the system lah, in a way lah. So I think that's one thing to remember, that it's not free. It's being talked about quite a lot lah.
Oh my
And
god.
this is all quite new in the sense that it's still in the gray area. It's rather unregulated, and it's also just a very new marketing agenda from the property scene, the developers and all.
Actually, it's not that new. When I first entered the property industry, it has already been happening. In fact, it's more like a closed deal, meaning a group deal.
Actually, I
Because
think I know what.
yeah, it's limited.
Actually, this thing it breaks my heart to hear this, because like usually when things like this happen, right, the one who really suffers are those people who want to generally buy a house, right, for
Yes.
to live in, right, and then because of this, right, the houses are actually artificially inflated.
Yes, Very true.
Because what Steph is essentially saying, right, is that people basically borrow money from a bank due to inflated property prices, and then they take the cashback that's given to them, right? And then essentially you have a artificially inflated property price lah, which is why just now, before the podcast started, right, I say that it's usually a sign of a property bubble, right? When you need 3 generations of money just to buy your first home at the age of in your 20s is usually a sign of a property bubble. Because when you include like interest rate increments, then you see stuff like that, right? The question is, right, when all of this suddenly stops, right? Like what happened in Japan, the property prices were increasing like nobody's business, right? Essentially, when the Bank of Japan stepped in, right, and then they pulled the rug, a lot of people, right, committed suicide. A lot of people. Because basically they really went up to their necks and they couldn't afford to pay the debt. So I think actually, Steph, thanks for sharing this, because I think this is something which we don't hear about very often. In a lot of I think the main issue that I have whenever I look at property marketing, right, is that there are many things like that which occurs, right, which is not usually talked about, and this is, I guess, one of the large contributing factor, right, as to why property prices have been high, I would say, relative to a person's income.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense now that like property prices in Malaysia, I'm not sure about other countries, but in Malaysia it has been going up very aggressively, even though like in KL, we know that there is a massive oversupply of property. Like there's just been more and more townships being built around the Valley area, and but then somehow these new developments, they have the launching prices just keeps going up and up and up like nobody's business. Now
Well,
you mentioned this makes total sense because it's being inflated artificially in that sense, and it sounds like a Ponzi scheme to me. I don't know.
Okay, I guess a question to you, Steph. I just wonder, right?
yeah.
In terms, I guess the best way for me to come from to look at this, right, and is to basically ask the fundamental question, and that is, in your area that this is happening, right? How is the resale market doing
The resale
relative
market,
to the new
meaning the
launches?
secondary market.
Yes, relative to the brand new launches, how is the resale market doing? Are people having trouble trying to sell their homes?
Actually, the sub-sale market, which is the secondary market, is doing pretty well because there's still value there.
Okay, I guess the better question, right, is in terms of pricing, right? Like generally, do you feel that the resale market tends to be more conservatively priced compared to new launches?
I would say it's a 50-50. There are some really good value in sub-sale still, but there are also sellers that are trying to take opportunity of the market, especially if the area is in high demand, to also jack up their price. I think it's normal lah. We all want to sell as high as possible, but there are also desperate seller who want to sell off to liquidate the asset for any. But I still find that there's more value in sell because you can negotiate for the price.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go for a new launch, you cannot negotiate the price, lah.
Yes,
see.
yes. Unless the developer is desperate enough, is really desperate to clear off the stock lah. Because the longer they hold the stock, it's also incurring cost to themselves.
Yes, that's
Well, guys, that is some insight from Stephanie. I always like to ask this type of questions because I find that it does give you some insight towards like the property market there. Okay, so we have touched on kinds of that. Okay, I would say that we have spoken a lot about like let's say basically personal loans as well as mortgage loans, right? And then now I want to focus the conversation on debt structures, and that is basically talking about things like how do you best structure debt, right, to make it work for you, right? So for example, like Ryan, you mentioned that you purchased a car, right, which is a debt structure that you borrowed at 2 point something% over a 10-year period versus a property where you borrow. Actually, Stephanie, when you buy a property using debt, right, in Malaysia, how common is it for people to borrow 35 years?
Actually, it's quite common for people to stretch as long as possible, especially for those under 35. Yeah. So you can stretch it until you're 70 years old. So as long as you're below 35 years old, you can stretch. You can choose to get until 35 loan tenure.
But doesn't that mean the person who's 35 had to work until he's 70 before he can retire? But the retirement age is at 60 officially.
Okay, I would say that, I see this all the time that people like try to borrow as much length as possible, like 35 years, right? Then assuming, let's say you borrow, Singapore, very rare you hear people borrow 35 years, quite rare, because the industry standard is none other than our HDB, right? Which is our public housing arm. And our housing public arm, the maximum they allow people to borrow is 25 years. We never go above 25. So usually we just borrow 25 years. After that, we sort of retire from there. We don't have to worry about paying rent. So I would say that, okay, coming back to debt structures, right? The way I see it when it comes to the biggest debt instrument is basically like property, right? The why people like to buy property, right? And then they take like, let's say 25, 35 years. Essentially, if you think about it, right, it's basically just a hedge, where they basically just pay forward their entire lifetime income of rent. So for example, if let's say you start at 25, right, then assuming the average age of a person passes away for a man is around 85, so 60 you'll probably live 60 years, right? And then if you buy a house, okay, and the intention of this house is to stay, and if you take a loan for 25 years, at the end of 25 years you don't have to worry about rent anymore because your house is fully paid, right? So in this particular debt structure, right, when you talk about it, right, in essentially what you're doing is that you're just making sure that you're having a sort of an insurance policy, where in this 25 years you fully pay off your house. So if you start at 25, at the age of 50, your house is fully paid and you don't have to worry about rental in your retirement age, right? Because I think it is a key concern, right, for some people, right, that even though we say that it's better to invest in the equity market, it's better to invest in, let's say, like a high conviction stock, right? I think the fact of the matter is, right, for most people, I would say 99% of the people, they don't really have that discipline to continually invest into asset class that is extremely volatile, because history has shown over and over again, not just amongst this Instagram personal finance, which we started in the last 3 years, right? But throughout my history of doing personal finance, that every single time there is a market crash, all right, people tend to freeze up and they don't buy and they don't continue to DCA. Whereas if you buy a house, let's say, and to counter the argument that the house dropped 50%, right? I think end of the day it comes back down to the make sure when you buy, right, it is you just need to make sure that the house that you're buying is of fair value. As what Stephanie said, the resale market is still quite like actually what Steph says has been saying this in this podcast, right, is when you buy something, right, just make sure that it is value. Like if you buy a car, you don't really need to buy a brand new car, you can just buy a second hand. Just make sure that you bolster your personal finance better before you can get a better one. Just get from point A to point B. Then when you buy a house, right, just make sure that you don't overpay for the house, right? Because if you are struggling like freaking like if you buy a house, right, and then your income is like, let's say 10,000 ringgit, if you're paying 8,000 ringgit to mortgage every month, you're over leveraged lah. Okay, because like 80% of your cash flow every month to pay off your house, and then you left 2,000 ringgit, right? I think you're just going to eat grass for 35 years, right? So that is not going to work, and then usually that also means that the house that you're buying is probably overvalued lah. Because when I did a quick check with Ryan on the Airbnb prices, right, and he tells me like 5,000 ringgit is like on an extreme expensive end of things in KL, right? It kind of tells me that these people are quite desperate to make sure that someone else is paying off their overinflated property prices and their mortgage rates lah. Because like I think 5,000 ringgit, I think like in terms of like mortgage payments, property value I think needs to be at least like close to 1 mil for it to justify that price. If you stretch it out for 25, let alone 35 years, right? So when you talk about debt structures, right, I would say that you need to find a structure that works for your particular case. Okay, I'll give a very two extreme ends of example. The first extreme end of example is, let's say, for example, you want to buy a laptop. Okay, for me, use my personal example. I want to buy a MacBook because I'm now traveling and I want to be able to work remotely. Okay, but then I have two options. The first option, right, is I were to buy a MacBook, I pay 100% cash, which I can afford. The second way is that I basically just use it as a rental piece and basically just take a personal loan, and then pay over 24 months. So which option would I prefer? Obviously, I prefer the second option because assuming the down payment for a MacBook is, let's say, about 5,000 ringgit, right, or 1,400 Sing, right, and then the other option is I take an interest-free loan, which I can pay off in 2 years. Basically, there's no interest, and I basically just pay, I think it's $40, is it? I think $40 or $50 a month for 2 years. So basically, after 2 years, I pay off the thing completely, and then the existing cash flow every month, I just invest in the S&P 500 or invest in Bitcoin, invest in Ethereum. So this structure makes sense for me because basically it feels like I'm paying a Netflix subscription to enjoy the utility of the asset today, which I know I can pay off. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
this exactly happened to myself also. There was one time, like way before the GPU shortage, right? I was actually building a computer and I've got all the parts down already. It's just that one GPU and I bought it just a few weeks too late, And then the seller decided to cancel on me thanks to Jensen from Nvidia raising all the card prices. Shout out to Nvidia, fuck you, Jensen. But anyway, I hate them with a passion. But what happened was the seller canceled my GPU, so I was left with a computer, and I cannot find a GPU anywhere at that point in time. So I was forced to actually sell the computer. But this is the nice part. I sold it for a profit, and then also another thing was I actually funded the computer with my credit card. So after I sold the computer for a profit, right, I yeeted everything into I ate everything into Palantir, which is not the best asset that you can do it, but I did. But but still, with Palantir going down by like how many percent is that? It's like it went from like 24 my buying price to $8, but I still did not get margin call. So I would say like this debt structure actually works for me. And it's relatively safe leverage on the equity side of things.
Yep. Okay. Now, let's move on to the other side of the structure, right? Okay. So just now you mentioned, right, Ryan, about your modem arbitrage, right? Basically, you just take you paid off. You basically took a credit card loan, is it, or personal
Yeah,
loan?
that's right. The credit card loan
Yeah.
on
So
the
so this
computer. Yep.
so this credit card loan, is it interest free?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to pay off in 2 years.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it's
So
not 2 years, but like it's 12 months, but still it's a quite a small amount. 3,000-4,000, and divide it up by like 12, you get like I'd say like
yeah.
maybe 600-700 a month. That's not too
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I guess like basically it just goes back down to what are you buying with this like debt, right? Because it's like, for example, usually credit cards, sometimes they can offer you 12 months, 24 months to pay off something. Like, this particular mic I'm recording in, right? I actually like took a 24-month interest repayment because I don't want to pay one lump sum. I actually took a 24-month interest free loan to pay this because like I don't I mean I can pay lump sum, but I just don't want to. I
Yeah.
want them to I just want them to wait. I just want them to earn, I would just want them to like earn the money, on a monthly basis lah. So in a way, if you think about it, right, if let's say your outlay is like, 30, 40 like sing, a month, it kind of feels like a Netflix subscription, where you're
Yeah.
paying off like money. So I guess like, that's one way to like structure like small wins lah, but of course the other end of the structure spectrum, right, where you're talking about debt structures, which are larger in size, most notably I think for most people is their mortgages, right? The key tenets which you mentioned is that make sure that when you buy a property, it is fairly valued, number one, and number two, what the amount of loan that you take shouldn't be so drastic and so dramatic, right? That basically it eats up even your own like makan fund. Because if you like Ryan mentioned, his car loan is like 33%. Then if let's say he take another like take another loan for the house, let's say it takes another like 30%, but usually banks will not allow you to draw down that much. Usually banks, they have like guidelines. They'll look at your income, look at your total debt that you have. And in Singapore, we have this thing called total debt servicing ratio, meaning that the amount of debt and cash flow you can take every month, right? Right now is regulated that you cannot exceed, I think, 40 or 50% of your cash flow monthly income. Singapore, we have those guidelines. So it's like when you go and take a loan from a bank in Singapore, right, they will basically just cross-reference every single loan that you have in your personal
Wow, I
capacity.
see.
And if it exceeds like 40 or 50%, the bank is legally not allowed to lend you more money.
That's a very good guideline there that protects the people from
Yeah.
overextending.
It serves two purposes. The first purpose is that it protects the people. And second purpose it does, right, is that it's completely cuts off the legs for people to basically overinflate the asset prices. Because the banks who are not legally allowed to lend more money than what is what is reasonable for a person. You get what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm not sure how Malaysia does this, but from what Stephanie has mentioned, I don't think this is very like much spoken about lah. So that's why every time Malaysians say that Singaporeans are quite blessed because our government is they take care of us. In a way, I won't dispute that lah. I will say that the Singapore government is quite good in making sure that the systems are here to make sure that it safeguards the people, right? Because 90% of our population here actually live in public housing, which is quite affordable because usually public housing, right, in Singapore, brand new, right, it ranges anywhere between 20 to 30% of our cash inflow. It rarely, very rarely exceeds that. Very rare.
20 to 30%.
Yeah. So for example, like, why a lot of Singaporeans, they buy houses in Singapore? Do you know why?
The monthly installment is less than the rental, right?
Yes, correct, completely. Yeah, this is the main reason why. Because when you do actually the numbers in Singapore, right, it is simply cheaper to buy a public housing than to actually rent out in Singapore. And you're talking about a price differential of about 30%. So for example, if let's say I want to rent a studio apartment in Singapore, right, 1 month is about, let's say, 1,008 about for a 500 square foot apartment, right, a studio apartment in Singapore. You get your privacy, everything. But if I were to buy a public housing, let's say I get a 4-room, right, that 1,008 is what I pay for a place, right, that is about 900 to 1,000 square feet.
Wow.
Yeah, so Singaporeans, as much as we like to complain a lot, our government very good one. I would say like, I mean, after speaking to many people across Southeast Asia, I would say that our government is quite up there one in terms of like they make sure that our basic necessities are taken care of lah. So there's nothing to complain. Even you can complain about the 99-year lease, being a lease, but end of the day, I would say that housing is affordable in Singapore. That's a bit funny to say lah, but that's kind of true. In the grand scheme of things, I would say that housing in Singapore is affordable, and
Relatively
it's
lah.
reasonable. It's relatively, and if there's any case in Singapore, right, the housing ever goes out of whack, right, the government usually steps in to make sure that it doesn't increase too much, like what they've did like in the last year or so. So coming back, in countries that don't really have like okay, not to shit on not to shit on Malaysia or any other Southeast Asian countries. So I don't want politicians come knocking on my door. You do have all these safeguards in wherever you are, right? I think end of the day, it comes back down to good personal finance, as what Steph has mentioned, as that is before you buy, right? Just make sure that you look for value.
Yeah, it has to serve the purposes and the utilities you're going for the item, especially when you're buying a huge purchase like a home where there's really no way that you can afford the house with 100% cash and you have to take on a huge amount of debt. And I
Yeah.
guess we can segue to the next question here, which is the next topic here, which is the role of debt in purchasing homes. So maybe Stephanie, you'd like to talk a little bit about that?
I would say like I think our main question we have, right, Steph, is that in terms of home purchases, right, in your experience, right, the role of that, how much of a role does it play in most people that you see in your line of work? Like in terms, because like in terms of like things like equity and investing, right, it's very clear that most people who invest in stocks and crypto, right, we don't actually use leverage. Whereas in home purchases, I would imagine, right, that most people take on loans. So in your experience, right, how big of a role does that play when it comes to home purchases?
From my experience, I would say it's very big. Of course, as for property developer, they would love having cash buyer, but the reality is, most people, I would say 99.5% of people really use loan, really need to have mortgage to buy their house.
So that means like for majority of the people, right, without a mortgage, they cannot buy a house or home.
Yes, or even if they have the money to do so, they don't want to do that. And especially, I mean, this is kind of like insider thing lah, especially for those that really want to cash buy, right? There's a reason why they want to cash buy, and it's usually is 50%. It's not because of a very good reason, like maybe like money laundering and stuff like that lah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, where all that cash is coming from, right?
Yes.
So
Well,
so
yeah.
in that sense, right, the banks are like super important because like everyone will flock to their banks and get like a loan just to buy a house, and therefore like all the interest rates and everything, it's like super important in that sense.
Now, I would say
Yes.
like, Steph, I guess the question is, right, how would you like advise, right, a person first time buyer, let's say I'm fresh in the market, I want to buy a house in, let's say, what is the, I would say, right, as a buyer, right, let's say there's two type of buyers. The first type of buyer, how would you advise the first type of buyer to go on that, right, when it comes to buying a house for family purposes, meaning I want to have a family. And then the second type of buyer is I want to buy a house, right, for investment purposes.
Mm.
How would you at best advise, right, these two group of buyers, and what are the differences?
Actually, for those that are buying for homestay, of course, you want to reduce paying as much interest as possible. So I think one of the options for them is to, to consider a full flexi loan where, you get to put more money into your current account to save on the interest paid in the long run as well. So you get to pay down your debt in a shorter amount of time and also lesser interest paid to the bank. As for investor, I think it's more different where you want to really maximize that, which is like maybe you want to have a longer loan term so that you can reduce the amount of installment you pay per month, especially for those that are renting out. And then because you want to get more cash flow, meaning lesser money goes to the installment, meaning more money coming into your own pocket. Yeah, I think that's the difference.
But like
So
going back to the investor group, right?
Mm.
There's also usually two types of investors for within the property market. One would be going for the capital appreciation of the home. The other one would be more going for like a rental or an Airbnb model, kind of like yield investors. Is
Yeah.
that true? And if how would you advise like these two different kind of category kind of investors in taking on their debt?
I think same goes to any type of investor. Most investors want to reduce their monthly installment as much as possible. And even for capital appreciation, like let's say if this person aim to resell it after say 10 or 15 years, the person, because with lower cost per month, you get to sell it off. You get to own the house and then sell it off for a profit. So it really depends. Unless the person really want to save on the lending cost, then the person may want to consider also paying lower interest as possible, like maybe opting for more installment payment per month, or or a longer or a shorter loan period. So it really depends ultimately what the person wants. But mostly want to save on the cost per month. So like mostly will opt for a longer period and any way to lower down or minimize the installment per month.
so that stems from the interest rate of the bank, right?
Yes.
Does it?
Yeah.
Interest rate of the bank, the terms that the bank give you. So, for example, if let's say, actually, I did a quick tabulation because I think we were having a conversation about how the OPR in Malaysia is increasing, not just in Malaysia, in Singapore as well. Because I just got a friendly reminder from my bank that they're going to increase the rates. It's quite sad, but oh well. But thankfully, my terms are fixed, so I don't really care. But I would say that in Malaysia, right? Like Stephanie, I think you mentioned a very critical component when it comes to like debt, the rules of debt, and that is when you take on debt, right, and then you're focused on like the monthly like payments, right, that interest rates does play a very big role in terms of your net investment return, right? Because let's say I actually did a number quite quickly of every single 1% increment, right, of your interest rates, right, actually does sort of impact cash flow outlay. It increases by about 10 to 15%. In the next restructuring. So, for example, if let's say your rental, right, let's say your mortgage, you're paying like 2,000 ringgit. Then, if the interest rate goes up by 1%, the next time it resets, it is going to go up by about 250 ringgit per month. And then if let's say it increases by 3%, that's additional 750 ringgit a month, which is close to a 30% cash outlay, right? So, coming back to this, right, I you see the main challenge I always have when it comes to property, right, is that a lot of people say that renting is a good way to play it, but in terms of practice, right, Stephanie, do you feel that there's still value add in this particular way to invest money in property? A lot of people, they say that it's good to buy a house, then you rent them for rental income, right? But in your experience, right, in terms of practice, does this still work in practice? Like, meaning I buy a property, I take out a loan, right, and then let's say I borrow 90%, if I rent out the place, do you still think that it's a wise decision to play the rental game?
I
Is it still
think
profitable?
Yeah.
I think currently for now, it really depends on the property that you select. I think it's very important because, like I mentioned in my previous post, right, you can't just go into a show unit and then choose a property and then you wait for it to be rented out. You wait for someone to come and rent it. I think investors need to take a more prudent approach, which is to look at several indicators before selecting and confirming to buy that property, to ensure there's really demand for the rent in the area, and also to be able to fetch the desired rental income that they want, and also be willing to also put in the work. So from my experience, because I also have a unit and for rent as well, and doing that, I really learned that it's not as good as people say lah, and it's not as easy also. I also do get worried. What if this year, by the time the tenancy ends, will the tenant renew again? So I have that kind of worries. And will the tenant spoil my furniture and stuff like that? And then for the next new tenant, will I still be able to rent out at this price? Because in the neighborhood, there's so many people also renting out the unit. So I think there's several indicators that can be used as guidelines to reduce that kind of risk, that sort of uncertainty, especially for investor or people wanting to get into the property investment space.
When you
I love
say
that.
data and like all this information and statistics, right?
Mm.
I saw like on your post, there was a specific website for Malaysia that you actually go to for all these statistics, right?
Yes, it's NAPIC, the NAPIC website, but there's also JPPH. All these are on property information. So JPPH is like Valuation and Property Service Department, and the NAPIC is also like the National Association for Property Information Center, something like that, where you get to have a comprehensive overview of the property. How is the property sector really doing? And they even dive into like specific states, although sadly it's not like by area, because there used to be bricks.my, which is now being acquired by Property Guru. So Property Guru, from time to time, they also do share valuable insights as well on how's the property market doing, so that property buyer or investor can make a better informed decision as well.
Some
So you see, guys, this is why we have Stephanie like on the show, because like like seriously, to find a person, right, who's like willing to share all of whatever she says, is so hard to find it inside the marketing, the flood of marketing when it comes to like property selling. Because every single time, right, they always tell us like, you can buy this right now, it's brand new, etc. It's very good. They always like sell you a very rosy picture. But I think in practice, what Steph has mentioned, right, is that it's not as easy as most people think. And whatever you have described, Stephanie, that's exactly right what me and Ryan have done in our own investment space in the equity and crypto sector. Like before we go in very like deep into an idea, or before we even put money into an idea, right, we actually do a shit ton of like research and analysis to make sure that whatever we're buying is like good investments lah. So I guess like guys, RA21 podcast has always been pretty much fundamentally an investment podcast, right? But I guess like that's why whenever like people always ask me like whether or not real estate is good or bad, I always say it ends of the day, right, it always goes back to like what are you really interested in and what are you keen in? Because whatever Stephanie has mentioned, right, is that she has done the homework to make sure that the area that she's considering to buy, and then she even talked about like various risk factors, which exactly what any equity investor would do before they buy an investment. Like before I even like buy into things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, like things like that, we actually do need to do due diligence, and actually like think about, potentially, Stephanie mentioned the potentially like you need to think about your debt structure, the term that you buy, then the interest rate increment, and then what Stephanie mentioned about interest interest rate going up, then whether or not you can afford, in finance, this is what you call sensitivity testing, because that's really like the only way to like do this type of projection, right? Because I'm inside personal finance, so every single time when a client comes to me, right, and ask me, right, whether or not they should take this loan at this particular, like take this loan, for example, they want to take a loan, right, that is like this debt structure 20, 30 years, right, and then they are concerned about the interest rate going up. The right way to do it, right, if you're a competent consultant, is to do an interest rate sensitivity test, meaning, right, you basically just do a projection, of the payment, and then do a worst case scenario. Let's say, okay, the interest rate I'm borrowing now is 1%. Okay, what if it's going up to 5%, 6%, 7%? Then you do that, right, and then you basically look at the projection of the end value of the asset. Let's say I buy 1 million, now the interest rate 1%. And then I foresee in 25 years, maybe I can sell for 1.5. If the interest rate right now is 1%, 25 years I sell 1.5. After I tabulate all the payments, am I still profitable? And at what point, right, in the interest rate, once it crosses that particular point, 4 or 5%, then I become a net loss, right? So you see, the thing is, right, the thing is, I find that people tend to oversimplify investing, right, and debt, right, when it's actually not as simple as the salespeople like to say, lah. Because end of the day, the sexy part is to sell you a dream. The unsexy part is to actually take a step back, right, and then do the numbers, the Excel, right, and basically like do all this like interest rate tabulation, and actually wonder whether or not, right, can it, number one, if you intend to sell in 20 years, right, whether or not it can actually hit your price. And then you need to have a level of foresight to see into the future, like what Stephanie mentioned, right? She's worried about like whether or not after the tenancy lease is up, whether or not she can get a price, and she's also concerned about competitors. These are things which we that investors are in equity we also think about, like 10 years from now, whether or not like like for example, if I invest in Walmart in 2010, right, I wonder, I also need to think like in 2020, right, will Walmart be destroyed by Amazon? These are things which we think about, and it all stands back down to how much do you like the investment class that you like? Because if you do like it, right, usually what tends to happen is that you get pretty good insight in that particular asset class. Yeah, so I think like because I think also the reason why we have Steph here, right, is because unlike the equity space, and the crypto space, right, we don't usually use margin, whereas for property, right, when you invest money, the likelihood, right, that you need to use margin and borrow from bank is quite high, because most of the time, in order for you to get inside property, no matter which like country you're from, you tend to need to borrow. Because I would say that even as what Steph mentioned, right, even if I have clients who have money, right, most of them will generally borrow money to buy a house, even if they are able to like fully pay. Because end of the day, what really matters and what they want is the liquidity. And then I would say also add in, right, that the richer and wealthier you are in the terms of hierarchy of wealth, beyond a certain point, once you become classified as a sophisticated or high net worth investor, right, the bank actually allows you, right, to borrow money, not in your home currency, but in other currencies as well. And that becomes very sophisticated. So it's another level of debt, right, which you never really see much talk about, right, in terms of the general mass market population of personal finance. Because if you go to like the high net worth and then you go to a private banker and you talk to them, you're talking about family offices, the loans that they give you is not even like, for example, you buy a property in Malaysian ringgit, right? Your money you borrow might not be in Malaysian ringgit. You might actually borrow in Japanese yen, or you borrow in like Swiss franc, or you borrow in other like currencies. And basically the reason why you do that is because the currency is either stronger, it's either weaker. Then when you pay off, right, you're actually making money double dipping. Right, you make money from the currency exchange, and you also make money from the property, and then you also make money from the interest rate. Because if you borrow, let's say, money from Japan, right, at one point, Japan, the interest rate was negative. Then if you borrow money from Europe, right, at one point, the interest rate in Europe was negative. You get what I mean?
Yeah,
So
it's leverage on top of like the foreign exchange.
yeah, so I would say that the main reason why I share this story is quite simple, because it goes back down to the fundamentals of asset liability, right? A lot of people always think that, liabilities is very shallow. I only have credit card, I only have personal loan, I only have mortgage loan. But the fact of the matter is, right, if you actually understand that and you know how to use it, what you're going to realize is that the levels of sophistication that goes into debt structures can be so crazy, right? It's really very sophisticated, where it even goes to the extent and the extent, right, where you can borrow, let's say, Japanese yen, right? And then you pay interest. Even the interest itself can be swapped. Let's say, for example, instead, I don't want to pay the interest rate that the Malaysian OPR is giving. I want to pay interest rate on Japanese yen. Do you know that there's also financial instruments that allow you to do that? They call it interest rate swap. So like
Wow.
I'm just giving you some insight into like the super like high level of finance and what these like bankers they like to like package all this style of loans are. But the fact of the matter is, right, before you can even get there, you always goes back to the fundamentals of no matter what instrument you take. Be very prudent with your purchase. Be very sure what you're buying and make sure that the things that you're doing, right, it needs to work in your favor. Because I would say I always have a mantra to all my clients. No matter which states of life come out. My mantra when it comes to dealing for financial institutions, especially bank, if it's too good to be true, okay, it often is. Okay, you need to learn how to navigate the financial space, and if you cannot do it yourself, honestly, you are better served, right, if you can find a professional who do it for you. Like, for example, I give you a very good example. Like, for example, when you have legal issues, you go to a lawyer, right? So if you have a financial question and you are not very sure of yourself, hire an accountant, hire a person who's good in this. Because end of the day, when you pay for this type of like professional advice, you're really skipping like 10, 15, 20 years ahead of your peers, right, who are just learning about this firsthand. So sometimes, right, it does make sense for you to pay for this type of like advice because if you cannot do it yourself, right, sometimes it makes sense for you to hire a professional to do it. Yeah. So coming back to the homes and debt, right, Stephanie, I think the next question I have to ask is debt's impact on asset price. Like, do you feel that asset prices are high largely because most people are buying homes using debt?
Personally, I feel that it's related. So I think like you mentioned just now where, the total allowable DSR in Singapore is about 40%, is it?
Yes, around 40 to 50.
Yeah, but in Malaysia, it's not that strict. So it depends on the level of salary the person is earning. So the higher it goes, the more you can borrow. And it can be even up to 80%. So of course, if you're a rich person, then you get even more. Meaning even more than that, meaning more than 80%. So I feel that that's one of the factors. And even it has also appeared in news several times that, because of the ease of getting credit, it has kind of somehow in a way push up the property price. So I find that there's a correlation on that. Yeah. What do you think, Aaron?
I guess the main question why I ask you that is because I'm wondering whether the property market is a credit market or is it a cash market? Because if it's a credit market, right, my question is how leveraged is the market? You get what I mean? Because it's like it's okay to borrow a little bit of money, but I think my concern comes, right, is that if you're talking about like a median income person, right, borrowing 80% of their cash flow, it kind of signals to me that either the incomes are too low or the market or the property market is very hot.
80% DSR, for lack of a better word, I feel like the property market is leveraged balls to the walls, man.
Yeah.
And then
Like
you see,
it really it's signaling like this is a lot of people gonna shit on me for saying this, but it sounds like a freaking bubble, I'm not gonna try to be like Michael Burry and like short the market, but I'm just so worried. It's part of like the reason why like I rented instead of like buying a place because I'm so concerned.
but
Meaning
Steph,
is,
you did mention, right?
yeah.
You did mention, right, Steph, that there is still value in the second resale market, right?
Yes. In fact, a lot of people have managed to, make some profit out of the subsell. Or if you really just want to find a value like worthy house to buy, there's still opportunities in the subsell market where it's not that expensive yet. Yeah, it's quite rare. You may have to take some time to look. And once you have found it, you have to really grab it. The property clock way of looking at the property market now, we are around, I would say, around 6 coming up to 7 or even 8 o'clock. So I would say most of the money made would be when the market is bottoming. So just like the stock market, right? So I find there's still value in the subsale market. That's why I always think that's value, but just have to be really hardworking to find out good deals. and desperate seller.
So
Actually,
follow-up question on these good deals on the sub-sale market, right? Does all these properties, do they tend to be in those high demand areas, like say for example in KL there's like Bangsa, there's like Monkera, there's like Desa Park City, and yeah, but do they tend to be located in these super high demand areas?
Yes, definitely. It's
Oh,
just that
that's interesting.
yeah, it's just that it's lesser, but doesn't mean that there isn't any. So just have to really keep a lookout. And then also I find have a few good property agent, like treat them well enough, they will give you the insider deal firsthand
like
before
Steffi
that.
Condo.
Yeah, no, because
Shout out to Steffi Condo at Instagram.
but I'm not based in KL. So if you have a few good agents, then they will definitely help you as well to give you the good deals before they post it out lah, or
Right,
promote it.
right.
Yeah.
Like
Because
for yourself,
you
Steffi.
yeah,
For yourself, Steffi, sorry to interject, but for yourself, do you actually buy brand new or you tend to go for resale?
I bought both brand new and resell, and I find that resell has more value. But brand new is good in a way where the upfront cost is not that high. You can get in cheap. Like maybe the developer throw in promotions, and yeah, so you can get in cheaper. But subsell, there's more value, as in I get to buy under market value. Yeah. So there's benefits for both actually. So one is get in cheap, and the other one is I find more value lah, like more under market value.
Mm.
Yeah.
Actually, Steph, correct me if I'm wrong. Would you say that for a person who wants to buy a house, right, to live in, let's say I don't care about investing, right, it makes more sense for me to buy a brand new unit. Then if I'm an investor, and my concern is capital appreciation and higher rental, does it make more sense for me to go sub-sale?
I think yes, but for certain subsale unit, the investor may have to get ready some like refurbishing costs, like to make the unit nice. Yeah, so that they can rent out at higher price. Yeah.
So guys, you
So
heard it from Steph. I guess like the main reason why I asked is because I do know that Kuching, the property market is quite hot lah. Like because I do have a few friends from Kuching, right, and they did tell me that the property market there has been very like the cost there, correct me if I'm wrong, has been soaring as of the last few years. Am I right to say that?
yes, it's quite scary, and I
How much
personally
percent increase would you say, like in the last like 3 years, like the property price you buy, not you don't have to tell us your performance, but I would say that what percentage increase like in the last 2 years since COVID?
I would say 20 to 30%.
Wow.
Every
Yeah.
year, or
I think no, I mean within these 3 years lah.
and then before these 3 years, have you ever seen such a huge increase before?
No, actually it's more gradual increase. But I would say it's because of the undersupply. Actually, Kuching is facing some undersupply. So if the area that you are targeting to get is facing some undersupply, definitely the area may be going to face like upward pressure on price. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone, you heard from her. There's alpha in Kuching. I repeat, there is alpha in Kuching.
Yeah, I would say like that's why we always enjoy talking to you, because like you tend to always come from a perspective where it is an investment and you need to do your due diligence,
Yeah.
which we do find that is quite rare amongst property lah. Because I mean, I don't think it's just specific to Malaysia, because I very clearly remember during the COVID crash, right, after the post-COVID, one of my mentors, right, he told me that he's been waiting a long time to buy a condo. He wanted to buy an investment property for his investments, for his retirement. So he wanted to rent out. So he was waiting for this like show flat, right, in Singapore, one of the condo developments, right. And then when he got there, because they opened the show flat, and everybody was so scared that the property that basically like the cash is going to shit because they're printing so much money, right, that there were like 8-hour long queues for people to buy the brand new launch condo. And like they started waiting at 8 o'clock, right, and then by 6 p.m. The entire development was sold out.
Wow.
What? One
Yeah,
day?
and then in one day the entire development was sold out. So my question is, number one, Singaporeans really got that much money, number one. Number two, number two, right? It also kind of signaled to me that it was a little bit of a bubble because because my mentor, right, he was actually buying the flat towards the end, right? Then he actually, thankfully, I don't think he said he wanted to buy because the price was increased insane. Because like I think within a span of like that 8-hour window, people were literally signing documents to buy units, right, where they have no idea where the units are, so they don't even get to select their units, and they're paying a premium of like 30 to 40% above the initial price at 8 a.m. So
Is that not a normal thing in Singapore? Because like in
no,
Malaysia,
it's
right?
not.
In Malaysia, right, like one of those high demand properties, what they do is like during launch, when you sign up, they do like a raffle thing where they kind of like pick people at random and give you like a couple of days time frame to confirm whether you want to buy the unit or not. But you don't get to choose where the unit is. It all depends on your luck in that sense.
As for public housing in Singapore, lah, but I would say that in the most of the private condos that I go to, you always get to choose your unit, your exact unit. They literally do a model up for you and they ask you, okay, where you want? You point to the unit, we tell you the unit number, then I buy. Yeah,
Right.
they really don't do raffles unless, as you mentioned, like it's a super hot like property lah. But I think the problem was that that particular property was not a hot property. It was like a pretty like average like property, and people were getting in because they were so worried about the undersupply because of COVID. So they were very concerned that that we weren't able to build enough houses for the next few years lah, and so they basically were waiting for a crash, and the crash didn't happen, right? Then basically property prices within a span of 1 year, like what Steph has mentioned, in Singapore also surged by 30%. There was a public housing in Singapore, right? I think last week in the news that sold for 1.4 million Singapore dollars.
Oh, that sounds like FOMO.
That is not I would say it's prime location. Okay, so in terms of like relative value to private, it's not too bad, but I would say that it kind of shows you like it kind of shows you basically going back to the case that I think most people, the reason why they are looking to diversify assets, right, is because they are very scared that the currency and their savings get liquidated and basically get devalued. Because I mean, you Malaysians probably would have felt it quite badly, I think, in the last year or so, where you saw your ringgit depreciate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so like I always like when I was young, I was wondering why because I came from a primary school where I think 30-40% of our classmates were Malaysians. So I always wondered why Malaysians like to buy gold when I was young. Then when I grew older, I started to realize it's because the ringgit needs to be hedged lah. I would say if you are earning in ringgit, then you do need to buy things to make sure that your savings don't get inflated away. I mean, inflation is also a problem in Singapore, but I think it's a bit worse when it comes to Malaysia. So I think that's why people buy store of value assets like property. And if you borrow in ringgit, right, and if you use that ringgit debt and then you buy a US dollar asset, it goes back to the question of double dipping, right? You earn on the currency and you also earn on the asset. Okay, Steph, I would like to ask you, right, knowing that you foresee, right, that interest rates are likely to increase, do you feel that it justifies people to hold cash, or do you feel that business as usual, people can still buy homes?
I feel that those who need to buy a home will still buy a home because I don't see a shortage of demand as of now. So I still feel those who really need will still buy. I mean, at least in Kuching, in the case of Kuching, but from the Property Guru report, it has been reported that there's more people renting than buying now because the demand curve is a bit slowing down now as compared to people looking to rent.
So does that mean there's actually like less? Because I think we can all agree that the property market is quite dominated by people who take on multiple loans to buy multiple properties, leverage and all. So would you say that there's much less investors nowadays versus renters?
I would say there's still a lot of investors because especially those who are really invested in property, they would think that property investment is more straightforward compared to other types of investment. So I really find that that's one of the reasons why they stick or they want to try out property investment now.
But I think, yeah, in that sense, it like in equities, we always say we want to dollar cost average, dollar cost average. But when you take a loan to buy a house, you're basically forced to dollar cost average for the next 35 months. So I think in that sense, it's quite good that people are disciplined enough to pay the mortgage every month and keep holding on the property until the day they sell, right?
Yeah, and if they can get someone to rent their place and give them cash flow, then I think that's also a very good thing lah. But provided they invest back the cash flow that they earn every month.
So in a way, that's kind of like dividend stocks and like dividend reinvesting plan, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
In-
So Erin, you were saying?
I would say that in many ways, what Steph has described is value investing lah, when it comes to property, because that's how I've always viewed the property asset class. Because whenever you want to earn or whenever you want to make profit in real estate, right, and property, usually what I've noticed over the years is that you need to be able to buy the asset at a valuation that's below market rate. That is really the main way that you make money from property, because like property, do you feel that it can 5x over 35 years? Is that possible?
It's only possible when you leverage. But
like
if you talk about like the underlying asset price, right, it's not gonna do that. It's
I
definitely
mean,
not gonna do that.
yeah, because in Singapore, right, I can share that in the last 25 years, our property prices definitely did not 5x. At most, it only went up by about 40%, maybe about 50%. The annualized rate of return for public housing in Singapore has only went up about 3% per year. So if you take a multiple, you take the 72, right? Basically, you're only at most doubling your property price in about 25 years. So like I find it very difficult when it comes to like property investing to come from a perspective of a growth investor. You get what I mean? Because if I borrow money, right, and then I'm paying like a 5% like interest rate, right, I find it very, very tough to get a return that is about 5 to 10x my borrowing. Because I would say that in most cases, property, the asset class is quite a competitive market. It's a very competitive asset class. You're fighting against developers, you're fighting against organizations who are designed to mass rent. And then you're also fighting against Airbnb, you're fighting against Agoda.com, you're fighting against hotels for accommodation, right?
Mhm.
So, and then if you're a singular person who has to juggle all this, right? Then I would say in terms of cost, in terms of business, the cost, the only way that you will have advantage, right, is that you are a single person. You're one person, right? And then you buy below market cost, which is essentially a value investor play, which is what you can do in equity. But I would say that it is probably more effective in property because property generally, right, the value of the real estate generally does hold because as what Stephanie has mentioned is that the demand for property generally does not go down. I think stems from cultural values in terms of the Asian culture because the Asian culture is that after you hit adulthood it's best that you buy your own place, you buy a house, because we do love properties but I think you also doesn't mean that you love a property means that you overpay, and that means that you must come from a person who is like, where is the value, and if possible I would like to buy below market price.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I definitely
Right. And
agree.
then I guess the bigger picture is whether or not the market price is inflated because personally I don't really see that I don't know how bad is it. I don't know how like inflated the market is because I'm not in Malaysia, but I can say in Singapore, right, I wouldn't say that our property market is overinflated. I would say that the government has learned over the years right here, right, to know how to manage the prices. And usually the key metric that I look at when it comes to whether or not the property market is overvalued, right, is to look at the mortgage cash flow percentage that people are paying in that country. If say that I do not think that we are in a bubble because on average, a couple usually still spends around 20 to 30% of their income into one home property. We generally do not exceed that. It's usually around 23%. And even if we come out cash, at most stretch 30% is the max. Yeah, this is the Singapore like percentage. Whereas in Malaysia, if you're telling me like people are stretching 50-80%, it's tough for me to get my head around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the number is a bit insane, I would say. The level of leverage that Malaysians take is a bit, I would say, it's on a very unsafe level, if that makes sense. Because
But
like
but
you just hear
but
stories about people aping like 50% of their monthly income into a house, just because their parents or their girlfriend, their in-laws wanted them to have a house. And it's like depressing, then the person's like living on like I don't know, minimum wage conditions. And then just because he needs to own the house, it's very depressing.
Yeah.
I think the standard of living gets hit quite badly also.
And if
Yeah.
you consider like I'm not sure about the whole Malaysia, but in KL especially, like Klang Valley, right? You just see like ghost townships popping up left and right. In the city center also, you have like all the ghost condos, ghost office towers, and there's like nobody. There's no occupants there. There's nobody who actually uses the property, and somehow or rather, the property prices are still going up like nobody's business. It just blows my mind because like in the end of the day, all these things are all supply and demand, right? But in Klang Valley's case, I speculate it's being propped up by credit, and that's like a perfect storm for the 0809 crisis in US.
Stephanie, just a quick question. Most of the people that you meet, do they come across as prudent buyers? Are they still quite prudent in the
Mm.
terms of the amount of leverage do they take? Like, on average, when you like look at people who buy property in your area, right? Usually, how many percent of their income? Let's say they are genuine like first-time buyers, they want to buy their homes. How many percent of their income do you usually take for their loans?
I would say because I serve mainly younger buyers like millennials. So I find that it's a 50-50. Some of them they know how much they should buy. Some of them they really have no idea. Like even when they come into a show gallery, right? They will ask me, how's the process like? How is it usually like? Or to apply loan, what should I have? And I would say it's not uncommon to have buyers that actually do not know how much they can actually afford before stepping into a show gallery. So which I think it's very important to know all this, like how much you can actually afford, how much debt should you take, whether you can afford these houses or not, or what price range should you look at. I find that that's not widely talked about enough lah.
What's a good like percentage range you think?
I would say 50-50. It's not that bad, but it's not that good either lah.
But as in, let's say, for example, if I'm a new buyer, right, what do you think is like the percentage of income I should set aside every month to comfortably afford a place? Is it 10% of my income, 20% of my income?
I would say those that I've come across, they would even go 30 to 40% of their income just on.
Oh,
Yeah. And it's like mostly couple.
Mm.
so
So
that means it's both of the couple, like the girlfriend and the boyfriend, both putting down 30 to 40% of their income just to buy the house.
yes.
Oh
And
my god.
they may not even need that kind of space, like a young couple, like what you mentioned, boyfriend, girlfriend, but they are looking at semi-D. So it's very not uncommon. It's actually quite common. So I feel that it's important to remind buyer to know actually what do you need. Do you really need that size? And then whether you really need to commit yourself to such a big purchase at this stage lah.
Since we're on the topic, right, I guess I'll just pivot to the next question. Like, how much leverage do you think these first-time buyers should actually take? Like, in terms of the mortgage and everything, how many percent of their salaries do you think is like a healthy ratio that these buyers should take?
Actually, I'm not sure if I'm professional enough to comment. I think no one
No,
should
it's
take.
okay.
Yeah.
Aside from Aaron, me, I'm also not a professional. I'm just speculating everything. No, wait,
Yeah.
just go for it. Go for it.
I think it shouldn't be more than 30%. I really feel that.
Yeah, that's kind of like my answer also. 30, anything more than a 30% is, to me, it's hell, I feel. Because I've been like on a 33% debt before, so I know how it feels to be like when you're servicing a debt that eats up 33% of your salary and feels like shit. It
Yeah,
really feels like shit.
and there's possibilities that may go up because of the interest rate as well. So that's pretty scary lah.
How much of like leeway or space that you would actually give if you factor in the interest rate increasing?
Actually, when it comes to calculating interest rate, right, I won't follow like the current interest rate. I will add in more. Like let's say when I'm using the interest rate calculator, right? Like for example, now it's like 3.1 or maybe increase to 3.5. So I will factor in, I will use 4 or 4.3 just to be safe. to know that actually at 4.3, even if it increased to 4.3, will I be able to comfortably pay for it still? So I won't go for minimum interest rate. I will go for higher, like when I'm calculating lah.
Just to be on the conservative side, right?
Yeah.
And this is what Aaron mentioned just now, the sensitivity testing.
Yeah.
Right, Aaron?
Yeah.
How much leverage should you take, and like what kind of the sensitivity testing that should actually go into the analysis before someone commits like 30 or 40% of their income to debt?
Okay. I love this question because this is the execution part of debt. So basically, I can share from experience, and also amongst my many clients, right, that whatever Steph has mentioned, 30% as the absolute max is probably a very good guideline, especially if you're Malaysian. Okay, why? 30%, right, gives you a very good, comfortable buffer because actually, right, in terms of personal finance, it's not uncommon to find people who will go up to 50%. Okay, but the reason why you want to stick to 30% is because you need that additional 20% as a buffer in case, as what Steph has mentioned, the interest rate goes up. All right. And for most Malaysians, you don't just have your home loans to pay. Okay, you also have a car loan most of the time. Right? You also have car loans to pay. And generally, if you cap it at 30%, then if the car loan takes another 5 to 10%, then you're looking at 40%. Right? So the last 10% is used as a buffer in event that the interest rate goes up. Because as I have illustrated just now, for every single percentage point increase in interest rates, right, your cash outlay component increases about 10 to 15%. So assuming, let's say, the interest rate goes up by 3%, you're talking about a 40% increment of your cash outlay, which actually translates to be about a net 10% increase of your debt commitment, right? Which is why in Singapore, right, the magical number is 23%. Because our CPF, which is similar to your EPF, right, 23% of our monthly commitments, right, actually goes towards buying a house. So the government has already predetermined that the percentage outlay is 23%. And that actually is very comfortable for most people to actually afford a house without actually coming out any cash. And basically, we just use our CPF to fund a house in Singapore. So it works in Singapore, and I'm pretty sure it also works in Malaysia. But I think the hard part for most people, especially young couples, to grasp, right, is that when you tell them, right, that they can only use 30%, then when the problem is that when they look at the options which they have, most of the time they are concerned that it is not enough to get what they want. Correct? Because whenever you set a limit, let's say 30%, right? Sometimes people will take a step back and they look, with 30%, you calculate this much, then you go to a show flat. Then the actual place that you want, right, actually might even take up sometimes 50% of your income. And that's like taking, as what Steph says, a bare minimum like interest, bare minimum interest without any sensitivity tests. Although 30% is a good guideline, I would say that most people, especially young couples, if they want a home that is what they want, they tend to go and stretch 50, sometimes 80%. Okay, in this particular instance, right, then you need to do what Ryan do, which is very simple. Basically, you need to earn more money. It's a simple solution, right? Because two things have to give. It's either you go for something which you can afford, or you basically just earn more money, realistically speaking. So it goes back to our career podcast, which is the previous episode, where you need to plan for your career to earn more money, to afford the things that you want, all right? Or you basically just start out small, as what Steph has mentioned. There's no harm in starting out something small. You know why? Because the beauty about property, right, and the beauty about real estate, right, is that when you start, okay, early as something that's affordable, you actually build equity on the home, okay? You actually build equity on the home compared to renting. Because let's say you rent, right? Let's say you're paying like 1,000 in Singapore. Let's say you pay about 1,500. You rent. After 25 years, you still have to continue pay rent. All right. Now, people like me and Ryan, we can do that, okay? Because we know that we're very disciplined to invest money into things like equity, into things like high performing businesses, high performing investment ideas that can probably 10 to 20x within that time frame. But I would say the large majority of people, right, 99.9% of people, right, most of them, right, they do not have that discipline to invest the savings that they would have gotten, right, from renting. So essentially, you go back to the mantra, right, that people buy property because they need to be chased by a tiger to basically discipline them to invest into asset building properties. So in this case, even though some people, right, they say they buy 50%, right? They put in 50%. But to them, the couple is okay because they don't invest their money. They're not going to buy shares. They're not going to buy equity. They're not going to buy crypto. So to them, the house is an asset which they are building. And anyway, after 35 years, they're fully paid. Then they own an asset, right? So I mean, there's many ways to think about this asset class, but I will say that for the many years that I have often viewed unfavorably towards the property asset class, right? I always never ever like dispute it, because I always know that there's an anchor, right, where there is a particular portion of people, right, who basically just not comfortable owning equity or stock investments. That's why they prefer property, because it's something they can see, something they can touch. And I think the fact of the matter of what makes property work in the event that you make sure that it's within your means, is that it keeps you invested, provided that you buy it at a fair value.
Yeah, basically the monthly mortgages that you pay is like forcing yourself to DCA every month. You have no choice. You have to pay it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
basically the end result is you see the end of the tenure, right? The end of 35 years, basically you don't have to pay rent. So even if let's say you don't sell your property, you have a roof over your head. You get what I mean? Which is quite invaluable for some people. Like my mom, she's not an investor. So I think the best thing that she did was that she buy a house and then now she doesn't have to pay rent now. You get what I mean? Whereas for
Yeah.
like people like me, people like Ryan, we are, I mean, I will say that we know how to invest our money, right? And we can do this because in a way we know how to invest our money, but for certain people, right, who are not very in tune with like investment classes, property, I would say that the property market, if you have very good professionals working for you, very good agents, right? Like people who know what they're doing, people like Stephanie.condo, follow her on Instagram, know what they're doing, right? Is that you get things at fair value, and the likelihood that property like drops as much as 08, 09, right? The risk can be mitigated, right? If you buy it at a fair value. Yeah.
Yes, or under market value.
I would say the risk in terms of like the risk, right, is a lot less in property as compared to buying a business, because in many ways I think property, the reason why it has held out so well is because it's very difficult for you to remove that fundamental belief that a roof over your head is a necessity in life lah. It's very tough lah, but we can make many arguments about it, but the truth of the matter is, if you are in a place where it's an Asian culture, right, Asians, we tend to like to own a roof over our head lah, and that's something which I do not foresee going away anytime soon. Like for many cases, like the youngsters might say that we prefer to rent, but in a situation, right, where buying a house is cheaper than renting, like in Singapore, I would say that most people will buy.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it just makes much more sense when the mortgage that you're paying is less than the rental. It's just a better financial decision all over.
Yeah, and of course you have to weigh that against like building equity also lah, because like sometimes you do have to factor in the fact that after 25 or 35 years you don't have to pay rent anymore. So you also have to value that at the end of 35 years, how do you value that rent-free asset? You get what I mean? Because like, okay, the way I do it is quite simple, right? Basically, like for example, I pay 35 years, I buy the entire amount that I put in over 35 years, let's say it's 1.5 million, right? Then I just basically just take an interest rate of that 1.5 million. So for example, if let's say I want 4%, so basically I just value the cash flow at 4% at the end of 35 years, growing at maybe like 5% a year. So for example, I will just value the end asset rental to me, rent-free, is about 60,000, maybe 60,000 ringgit every year that I don't have to pay. So that's how I value it lah. Yeah. So I think that's something which is quite, that's like the easiest way to value that structure which when you buy a property.
But we
then
talk about risk, right? You mentioned just now there's a higher risk in equity compared to property, but I kind of like disagree, because I'm coming from an angle, right, where I would think that getting yourself into a mortgage actually means that you are holding onto an illiquid asset which you cannot readily sell compared to like stocks or crypto. But of course, in crypto, when you buy crypto or equities or like the high performing growth stocks, those are volatility, but there's just like a nice little balance between liquidity and volatility. And does that make sense? Like there's a nice balance. If like you go for the stability, then there's like just much less liquidity on the property market. But vice versa, if you go for like equities, there's like just much more liquidity. You can sell whenever or you can buy whenever. But it also comes at a price of volatility.
I would say that to clarify on the risk, I would say that my main point of view when it comes to risk, right, when it comes to asset classes, is whether or not the individual can actually execute when shit hits the fan. You get what I mean?
Yeah,
And
that makes sense.
in the case of property, right, even if shit hits the fan, the likelihood that the person continue to pay mortgage is actually a lot higher than a person to continue to DCA into equity, because I have seen it in practice, right, that even in the COVID crisis and then in 2011, 2012, right, when the market was falling, I very rare see people, right, they actually continue to invest their money. In fact, some of them even stop their DCA, you know. And I think the worst part for I think for equity, right, is that you DCA into a dying business.
Oh yeah, that's the worst. That's actually
Yeah.
the worst.
So like I guess it depends on the individual on how well tuned they are in the asset class. And I would say that the reason why I say property market is sort of less risky is because it is quite I would say that in a way, because it is so competitive, you know, the market is so competitive that in many ways, if you actually are just a little bit prudent about it, right, the likelihood that you lose your entire wealth is not as high as equity if you're not careful in crypto.
The worst case scenario, you end up with a house
And it goes down lah.
yeah,
That's the
but
worst case scenario.
you still have like a house for your retirement or something, a roof over your head when you're older. Yeah, it's not too
Yes.
bad. You see, the downsides are not as bad as like equities.
Yeah, I mean
That I would agree.
we have seen the repercussions of what happened last week, right? When we saw like one of the biggest like crypto projects went to shit. You know, there were many Singaporeans, right, who actually like sold their house and then like took a reverse mortgage. They took loans against their house and they basically invested everything into Terra and Luna. You know, and then when that crashed, literally they had to start from scratch. They like went from 2.4. Some of them went from like multi-millions, went back all the way down to zero. So it was,
Wow.
I mean, this is a very perfect illustration example of human psyche, and that is when facts change. You'll realize that most people tend to not change their views in a down market, because I think it is very having invested so many years, right, I sort of come to the conclusion that people don't want to believe it, right, when facts change, and they tend to be quite stubborn into holding on to assets even though the facts have changed, right. There are many examples of this. You look at when Amazon was rising, people say that Walmart would take the lead, you know, and then now you say that then in the instance of like Tesla, you know, where they start to grow so much and then they say that they will never take the lead, you know, and then now you say that there's crypto, you know, Bitcoin taking over like the monetization, and people will say that there's no value in it, when even though final settlement is actually a very valuable like thing to have, you know, it's a very actually like Bitcoin, the final settlement network is something which is extremely valuable, I think, to many people, you know, because the across space and time, right, it is property, digital property, which has never been done before, right? So that's why I invest inside Bitcoin. I've done my research, I've done my homework, and that's why I invested, right? So I mean, these are some examples, right, where, you know, when you invest your money into equity, right, you have to understand that in the business environment, they generally change every 5 to 10 years. There's usually waves of innovation and change that happens every 5 to 10 years, which means that investor, right, of a business or a singular stock, right, short of buying the S&P 500, you have to be willing to pivot, which I find right, most people cannot do, because they always end up buying things like Bursa Stock Exchange. Even in Singapore, they tend to buy things like STI. Yeah, you know, and that's why I say, like, in the property market, it takes usually about 10 years before the market really change, because like the speed of how the market changed really depends on how fast you can build the buildings, right? So in many ways, the property market it just moves slower than the equity market because it's not as liquid. So in many ways, right, therefore, if you're talking about 25-year time horizon, I would say that property will not change as much as business climate.
Right.
Yeah, that's why when you talk about like risk, right, sometimes people they just are not that comfortable to see much change. They prefer something which is very predictable. They sort of know like 20, 25 years, they can still see that, it will still be okay. That's why they buy property. Yeah, it all ties back down to who you are as an investor, as an individual, and then like what do you want to achieve in your wealth building goals. Because there's not one way to do it. There's multiple ways. But as you mentioned, Ryan, I like what you mentioned is that you need to have a very good balance. You cannot just like I would say that all into one is not a very good way to go about it. I think like end of the day, I do advocate for making sure that you at least even if you don't invest in the other asset class, right, at least acknowledge that there is opportunity there, and then you just have to acknowledge that that's just not for you, which is what I did in property lah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm also not a property guy because like I'm just not too interested in like what Stephanie said just now. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
You have to engage lawyers, you have to engage your property agent. I'm just not into that because it's just way too much work for me. To me, like equity is like I just put in money and then I deposit my money and I click the buy button and then I'm invested. It's a 10-minute process versus like how many months of due diligence and survey on the site. So I'm just not up for that.
Yeah. And it depends on the person's strength and the advantage that a person have, right? If the person is in property, then it's definitely more advantageous for a person to invest in property.
Yeah, definitely that's the unfair advantage that a person who's in the industry has over like more layman investors.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's get into like the next topic that we've talked about, the interaction of debt and currency exchange rates. So how does currency exchange rates impact your loan size, Aaron?
Oh, wow, this one. Okay. I think the best example I can give is my personal loan, which I took in Singapore dollar. And then I used that to buy crypto, right? And then basically, a lot of people would say that I made a mistake, but I would argue otherwise because actually my loan tenor is 6 years. So I don't. Number one, I cannot time the market. All right. Number two, basically my loan is about, I think, 3 or 4% annualized, for the next 6 years, right? So I think for me, right, my question is twofold. This one is not just interest rate and currency. I borrow in Sing dollar, all right, and then I invested into crypto, right, where the growth is about 50% for the next 6 years versus a loan which is about 3 to 4% per year. I just estimate that the likelihood that this will be a good investment is high, and also largely the reason why I took that loan is because I am not leveraged before I did this. Basically, I don't have debt. I'm actually debt free, and then I did feel that it's important for me to have a little bit of that because I do want it, right? And also to build future credit like ability, like it's what Steph say, right? You need to have a little bit of a credit history, So that's why I decided to do it, because I do have like upcoming like future big purchases which I want to do and I do want to borrow. So it's good to display that I have like a good credit history of repaying my debt lah. So that's why I took it. So and also because the loan was in Sing dollar, and the Sing dollar ever since, like many other currencies over the last 3 months, has devalued against the US dollar quite significantly. I borrowed the Sing dollar, I think, when it was about 1.32. Now it's about 1.39, 1.3, 1.4, which means that my debt size just from the currency exchange alone has already been devalued by about 6%. Yeah.
Wow.
So just the currency exchange alone, right? I think if I borrow in ringgit, it will be even more lah. So, but I don't think I can borrow in ringgit because I don't have like a bank account in Malaysia. But I mean, this just displays, right, like if you're able to borrow debt, right, in a currency that is inflating, right, then you can invest it into a hard asset that is in even in US dollar, right? Generally over time what you'll realize is that it tends to be a pretty good arbitrage play lah, generally. But I would say that it all goes back to like just make sure that you don't overcommit and overborrow. My debt size is very super manageable. I don't spend more than in fact, my debt outlay in terms of my cash flow, I don't spend more than 5% of my cash flow on debt at all. So basically, you talk about 20-30%. My debt outlay cash flow every month is only 5% of my income only. So I really don't I don't really have a huge outlay for debt lah.
Right.
Yeah. So when you look at my structure, right, I'm very, very conservatively structured. And essentially, I just need a microsaver, which is what I feel is the right decision to make. And I'm very comfortable with it. I'm very comfortable holding that. I do like that structure, because I know that my time horizon is in 6 years. And then I estimate that the likelihood of success is very high. And I think most of all, I can actually pay off the debt. I actually took on debt which I can pay off. And if I liquidate my assets, I actually can pay off, no issue. Yeah.
So, Stephanie, do you have any thoughts around this?
No, actually, yeah, I actually have a question that I wanted to ask as well regarding this. So, well, property and I mean, is there any relation between property and exchange rates, and how is it like? And yeah, how to make use of it?
I would say yes if you're a huge borrower, because what you realize, right, is that for the people who are literally quite who are the people who are a little bit wealthier, right, usually the bankers, right, they will usually ask them if they want to take loan and then post collateral. So usually what happens, right, is that they will usually put collateral for hard assets, and usually things like property lah. So they'll put the property up for collateral and then they'll borrow the money. Right. So then usually when they borrow the money, the way that they can borrow it is either they will give them an option to either borrow in local currency or borrow in foreign currency. So if you borrow in foreign currency, right, and then you use your collateral, which is like denominated in your local currency, right, then there's also an arbitrage that's going on. So for example, if you put up a collateral of like, let's say a Malaysian property, right, but then you borrow in US dollar, that might not be the best way forward lah. If you like borrow if you like put collateral, right, which is like basically in a local one, and then if your local asset tends to be inflationary against the US dollar, it might not be the best way to go about it. So what you usually want is to borrow in the local currency, and then you basically use that to buy harder currency lah. In this case, usually I just show the US dollar, because usually US dollar, usually the currency over time has always shown to demonstrate very good inflation resistance as compared to other currencies. Yeah,
Right.
that's what I would say.
Thanks for sharing that.
So I mean, like in terms of like impact to like the retail investor, I would say that most retail investors will not really see this issue, but I guess the fastest impact you will see is the depreciation of your currency, right? Which is like I've shared the story, right, for Singapore and the Singaporeans who invested money in properties in Malaysia, right? Like there was a period of time when many property developers were marketing their properties of Iskandar, Johor Bahru, right, to Singaporeans, right? And a lot of Singaporeans actually bought property over there in the hopes that basically whatever they have sold, like, could be executed. And essentially what happened was that even though on paper they might have earned in terms of ringgit, right, but when you actually translate the ringgit to Sing dollar, a lot of Singaporeans actually lost money. And the worst case is that I think a lot of them cannot actually liquidate their purchase of the property. And the worst part is that even if they have a place to stay when they go over there, right, the property development, the area there is basically just not developed. Yeah, so this is a very good example, right, of you buying assets overseas, right, and then basically even if let's say there is a paper gain in the local currency, right, but if the local currency works against your favor, all right, because the Sing dollar has strengthened against the Malaysian ringgit in the last like 10 years, right, you will start to realize that actually even though on paper you might have earned ringgit, right, actually you lost money compared to if you had just whole Sing dollar. Yeah, so that is something to keep in mind because like I think the movement against the Malaysian ringgit was north of 20 to 30%. So if you had purchased a property in Malaysia, let's say for 1 million ringgit, right? Because the government also did mention that foreigners in Malaysia, especially Singaporean, if you want to buy a property there, minimum purchase price 1 million.
Yep.
In JB, right? So it's like, number one, 1 million ringgit is quite a lot of money in Malaysia. I think for a foreigner to come in and put in 1 million is really a lot. Then when you compound that with like already above market rate, right? Then you compound that with the fact that the Sing dollar like strengthened against the MYR, then you're talking about a minimum of 1.3 million just for you to break even over 30 years. Over like 5 to 6 years. So that is a pretty tall order, because you still have to include your renovation costs, you still have to include your legal fees, you still have to include your all the hidden costs. Then once you calculate, right, it can be as high as a break-even cost of about 1.4 to 1.5 million ringgit. So even if the property price rise to 1.5, and even if you still manage to liquidate that, right, you calculate all this, right, actually you don't make money at all. So when you like look at it, right, like that's the main reason why not just currency exchange rate, but I would say that foreign ownership property rules is also one of the main reason, right, why I don't own foreign property. Because I think, right, for most people, right, the best place that you can buy property is your passport citizenship. Where you come from, I think that is the best place for you to buy property, because essentially, the government there cannot make laws, right? Hopefully cannot make laws to screw their own citizens, which is why personally I never buy foreign real estate in my own portfolio, because I have seen, I have witnessed, and I've shown time and time again, right, that if it push comes to shove, right, generally the country will first protect their local residents. They will not protect foreign investors first, usually.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, lah. So like as much as they say like maybe Malaysian property is overvalued, I would say that when you buy property, I would say that the first place that you need to buy is the country that you're from, lah. Because I think it's quite difficult for you to go wrong if you buy a property in your own country, which yeah, provided that you pay a fair value, as what Steph has mentioned.
Definitely. It's a big purchase, and you really don't want to do it outside of a country that you're unfamiliar with. It makes it 10 times harder in a sense.
Yeah, like even
Yep.
if your own country is very tough already, you go to another country, you don't even like speak their
Speak the
lingo.
language.
You don't speak their language, you cannot control anything. Then you go over there like some brother like that. I tell you, a bit tough. Like there's no real control. It's not like equity where you can exit anytime in the liquid market. Like if you're not happy, you can just exit because there's protocols to do it. Property, considering that's really immovable, right? Like you would want to be in a place, right, where you have some sort of influence and voting power. So that's why I always say if you want to buy real estate, it's better to start from your home country first before you even think about going overseas.
All right. I guess let's move on to the next topic that we're going to talk about. One that I'm really excited for. Debt and interest rates. So like we've been talking about like in Malaysia, the OPR rates have been increasing and everyone's going apeshit about it, and you start to hear stories about people struggling to pay their home loans, their mortgages, and people worrying. And I believe like not just on the property market, but also like in the equity side of things, people also are getting margin call and whatnot, and the interest rates, the Federal Reserve is just screwing everyone, taking back all the money they printed. So I would like to ask you, right, Aaron, how like the fixed and all these floating rates impact your debt structure in both like the sense where you invest in equities and also more importantly property purchases.
Okay, the thing is, right, this particular subject has always been a very huge contention issue amongst like the personal finance space because like I think for the longest time, right, a lot of old timers who started buying property in 0809, right, they always like to show and tell people and brag about the fact that they have made floating rates loans in the last like 15 years, and they say that floating loans will always be cheaper than fixed rate. All right. And they are coming from a point of view, right, that this is like consensus in a time frame, right, where in 2010 all the way in the last decade, right, that we have been very privileged to be in a super low interest rate environment, right? So in many ways, like how most people only know there's an up market, right? And in many ways, most people thinking that floating rates will never exceed fixed rates. There's a bit of a speculation over there. I would say that if you have actually like gone and checked the historical like interest rates, even in Singapore, right, there are times where fixed rates, which is basically the wholesale rate, if you borrow from the Public Housing Development Board in Singapore, your fixed rate is only 2.6%. That's fixed for life. And they rarely increase it. They don't increase it. In fact, the fixed mortgage rate in Singapore is 2.6%. Whereas there have been instances of my clients who were much older. They come from the tech bubble crash, right, where their interest rates are overnight floating, right. Instead of 2.6, it went up all the way to 5 to 6%.
Wow.
Yeah. So don't take it for granted, that's all I can say. Like fixed, floating, end of the day, right, as what Steph and we have mentioned in this podcast, is that the best way, right, to look at debt and interest rate and how fixed and floating rates impact your structure is to do a sensitive interest rate analysis. This means do what Steph do. Go online to your online calculator and then don't take it for granted that the lowest interest rate you see by your banker, 3.2%, is the best way. In fact, I would advise I usually do what Steph do, which is to add 1 more percent. So instead of 3.2, try to do 4.2% and then see whether or not the affordability is still there for you in the long term. And then at what point will this interest rate start to be very heavy for you lah? And usually I would argue it's around 2 to 3% increase. I think 1% is still okay, but usually once it goes to 2-3% additional, then that's when you're going to start to see many people default. Because people who are borrowing like 50-60% of their income, 1% still okay, but 2-3% you see them start eating grass already. Right? So in that or debt and interest rates, right? As much as possible, even though my fixed interest rate in the short term tends to be more expensive than floating, I have always advocated as much as possible that I would very highly prefer to have fixed. And that has been consistent throughout my entire practice in my own personal finance. I tend to always go for fixed, even though I'm paying 2 percentage points higher, because I'm playing the long game. If I'm going to buy a house, right, and I'm going to pay for 25 years, how will I know if it's not going to go above 2.6? I don't know. Like today, you can tell me that the interest rate maybe at most is 1.5. Like Singapore, the mortgage rates, I think in 2020 was about 1.5, 1.6%, and they only fix it for 3 years. Do you know that banks in Singapore right now don't dare to even offer you fixed? Banks in Singapore today, they don't offer you fixed. They don't dare. They offer you float only. They don't dare to offer you fixed. So the only entity in Singapore that offers you fixed is the Housing Development Board, which is tagged at 2.6%. So it's a sign of what is going to happen that everyone foresees that the interest rate is going to increase. And then what happens when interest rate increase is that you will see asset prices come down, because interest rates are like gravity to asset prices, right? That's what Warren Buffett likes to say. And then for every percentage increase in interest rates, your multiple compression, you're talking about 10 to 20% down. Because assuming, let's say, a company is trading at 30 PE, your yield is 3%, correct? About 3.33%. If your interest rate goes up by 1%, then you're basically, in order for you to match that 1% increase, your entire valuation of the company has to fall by 20% in order to match that 1% increase. That's why you see the equity market has been murdered, right? Because I did write about it in my article in the macro talk in my Instagram. I did say that you're going to see multiple compression, and it's going to be very painful, because every 1 to 2% increase of interest rate, you're going to see a multiple compression of about 10, 20, 30% drops, which actually did occur. So you ask me, in the short term, is this going to continue? The likelihood is yes. I don't foresee it going off anytime soon. But at the same time, I would say that the best way for you to de-risk against this is to make sure that when you invest in an idea, it is a high growth one, or you buy below market cost, which is what Steph said. Which is basically two ways about it. You either go into a super high growth business or go into a super value growth business. Because the Steph, when she buy property, she like to buy below market cost. So that gives her some buffer against in case valuations drop, right? Then basically when you already buy below market cost, then your borrowing already is a lot less compared to people who buy at a super high valuation, correct? Whereas if you buy into a high growth stock, right, you can be saved by the high growth that company has. The best example I can give you is in the 1980s, right, where the 1%, the interest rate back then was as high as 18%, 18. So
18.
Yeah, 18%. The interest rate back then, he raised it all the way to 18%. So corporate debt borrowings, the interest rate was close to 20-25%. Yeah, for 1 year. Yeah. So if you wonder why interest rates has been going down for the last 30 years, it's because this fella, right, this Paul Volcker, since 1980s, he jacked up the interest rate to 18%. That's why bonds have been performing better than equities, right, in the last 50 years.
Oh.
All right, because we went from 18% all the way to negative. All right. So you ask me, right, whether or not we're going back to the 18%, I don't think so, because I don't think we can afford it. Because last time 18%, right, the debt, the America, the GDP, they only borrow about 30%. Today they're above 100%. So there's no way on earth that we're ever going back to 18% unless there's a black swan, which I don't think will occur, right? So the best way, and during I will give you the best example of a high growth business being able to outperform the interest rate, right, is none other than the company called Nike, right? Nike IPO in the 1980s, just when interest rates were, I think, around 18%, and they actually outperformed the S&P 500 by about 3%, so which is about 40% overperformance. And the reason why they can outperform is because they were very high growth businesses that grew more than 50-60% every single year for the last, I think, I think for the last like 30 years. Yeah, then of course you need to learn how to pivot lah. So that it demonstrates a very good example of a very good investment, provided that the business can execute. So the best way to counter interest rates, right? Changing interest rates. Number one is if you can go for fixed. If you can't go for fixed, then the best way you can do it is to make sure that you either buy something which is growing very, very super fast. All right. I think Ryan and I have discussed at length at this that we like crypto and we like Tesla. And the second way to best protect yourself against floating rate interest rate, right, and the structure is do what Steph do, which is to buy below market cost. Because that margin of safety, right, which comes from value investing, right, is what is going to save you, right, when valuations come down. Because if you already buy below market cost, right, the bank will find it quite tough to call and do margin call against you if the property market goes down. But if you buy above cost, if you buy above 20-30% above market cost, right, and then assuming let's say the market were to come down, your debt doesn't go away. As what I mentioned earlier in the podcast, right, you borrow 900k, the valuation of the property gets cut into half. Your debt don't get cut into half. You still have to pay that, and then the bank will call you and ask you to top up.
So, like in terms of like property, right? There's really no way to actually say you offer you want to change your floating rate loan to a fixed rate loan. So in the event where the interest rates, like what's happening to Malaysia now, the OPR is going up, right, Stephanie? What do you think is like the better precautions to take to protect yourself and ensure that you are able to continue paying off the mortgage?
To be honest, I have no solution for that actually. But for those who have yet to buy a home, I think it's good to consider renting if it's no longer affordable to buy a home lah. I find that people are not missing out anything even if they choose to rent at the end, like shifting their priorities from buying to renting instead. I think there's really no harm to that. As for those that are already in a mortgage, I think you can consider using a full flexi loan, so that if you have any extra fund, you can just put it into your current account and really save on interest rate paid to the bank in the long run.
Right.
Yeah.
But it really stems from just good personal finance management in the end of the day, right?
And really make use of what the banks are offering. Really make use of the packages that they are offering.
Actually, just one quick question, Steph. I like what you mentioned about how you say that you're not really losing out on renting instead of buying. And why do you think that is?
Actually, I did a calculation myself comparing the
Okay, maybe you
buying.
can share that because I think our listeners would love to hear it.
All right. So I think at the end of the day, whether you buy or rent, you are not losing much, provided that when you rent, you also continue to DCA in other type of investment like equities or crypto. But if on the other hand, you choose to only buy a property and then you don't DCA into other investment, then actually the difference is that if you choose to buy the property, in the end you get the property. But if you choose to rent and then you still diligently go and invest, you still get pretty good return on your investment at the end of the 35 years, for example. So that's why I would say that people are not missing out, even though you are renting. If you really calculate it lah, like if you really pull out an Excel and really do the calculation yourself, because to buy a property, you need to come up with upfront costs about 15 to 18%, at least in Malaysia. So for the rent case, you get to free up that kind of commitment, that kind of upfront cost, and you use it to invest, then it will definitely pay off lah, I feel.
The only thing you have to cough out when you rent is the is it down payment? Yeah, it's the
a security deposit. But
the security deposit, that's right.
yeah,
Oh,
but it's
usually 1 or 2
refundable.
months.
Yes.
But just to elaborate on that, if you do Airbnb, there's no need for that. I didn't have to come out any security deposit when I rented this place.
Yeah, there we go. 0 deposit.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't even have to cough out the full 3 months. They allow me to pay monthly.
Wow.
Yeah, so I don't even have to put security deposit. And even if they ask for security deposit, they also allow credit cards which will not be charged.
That's good. There's even like this co-living concept in Malaysia getting more popular, like the Witopia by the company Witopia, that allow people to rent as well without having to cough out like the security deposit.
I think it's relatively a new thing. Like they call this, there's like a insurance they buy where it secures the rental. In this case, the company, Witopia, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it enables the renters to not pay a security deposit.
Mhm.
But also at the same time, while it's a risk for the people who rent, so they are protected by the insurance.
I see. That's good to know.
All right. Yeah, that was a very nice discussion around the debt and interest rates.
I just want to make a comment that I actually love like Steph comment about how you will not lose much if you actually like diligently invest, because I think it's a real challenge, right, for most young couples to actually sit down and talk with their parents, right, who usually love to insist that no matter what they need to buy a house, because I think this is a discussion that is very common amongst Asian families. Western families, I don't think the parents care that much, but in terms of like Asian culture, because we are so like family oriented, right, usually when parents say something, usually as good Confucius teaching, we try our best to take that into account. Like, even for myself, right, even though I'm good at investing, for the longest time, my mom has always been bugging me to buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, which I always do not listen. Right. So I think when Steph actually did mention, and considering that she comes from the property space, right, that you don't lose much by renting, provided that you do your finance properly, right, really speaks to, like, it really got to the core, right, that it should display to you and should explain to you, right, that if you really do your personal finance well, that the advice from parents that you should only buy a property, you should understand that that advice usually comes from a time, right, where investment knowledge is not as wide as today. I think that's where it comes from, because you have to understand, I think for most people, right, that during our parents' time, we do not have like personal finance channels, YouTubers, forums educating people about investing, which is why, when you talk about stocks and shares with your parents, especially in Singapore, Malaysia, usually they talk about Bursa and they talk about STI. They don't talk about American companies. And actually, even for myself, I speak to so many like investors. I've only met about 5 or 6 people, right, who actually started investing in American equity all the way from 1980s, and they did very well. But these are really the very, very rare people who in 1980 actually invested in the S&P 500. Most of them, I would say, invested in STI and Bursa stocks, which from experience is not very good, because local equity markets are quite small. So the limit to growth is quite limited. So you have to fund. I think when you discuss with your parents, right, you just have to make it known that times have changed, and we do live in a world of globalization.
Yeah.
Yes, totally agree.
Yep.
All right. So on to the next topic. So we have talked about like what is debt in depth. Wow, that's a pun right there. But now let's talk a little bit about how to make debt work for you, make it a productive financial instrument. So maybe Stephanie, do you aside from like taking mortgages in the property scene, right? How else do you think like someone can make debt actually productive?
Like let's say for the property industry, right? I mean, people can buy a house and then rent it out, and then when they rent out, they earn rental income, which they can declare as additional income. So in return, they get to borrow more, whether it's for another mortgage or something else. So I find that that will help them, but provided they do declare and pay income tax for that to build their uh, credit profile. I think that's very important, and that's what the works consultants to ensure that their credibility is there and is being built, so that they can take more and more and to build their business, for example.
You build credibility and trustworthiness so that they can further take more debt to actually grow their businesses and or invest somewhere else.
Yes.
All right. How about you, Aaron? How do you think
Okay.
like we can make debt work for you?
Okay, I always like to see this question from a perspective of margin of error, which is what I've illustrated earlier in this podcast. Which is if the debt instrument that I'm taking is, let's say, the interest rate is between 3 to 4%, right, and I'm borrowing it for, let's say, 10 years. Essentially I'm paying 3 to 4% annualized, right, every single year. Okay, then if let's say the investment idea I have, right, if let's say the maximum return I can get is only 8%, that gives me a margin of error of only 4%. All right, which in my opinion is not enough for me to want to borrow money to execute on the investment idea. Because I can share from personal experience, right? During the COVID crash, I had so many people come up to me and ask, right, whether or not it's a good idea for them to borrow money to buy into investments that only yield about 5%. And the borrowing cost was about 3%. All right. So when you
2%
do,
alpha.
yeah, so like, hey, look, you guys are borrowing like money at 3%, and the maximum that this thing can give you is only 5%. I say, hey, your margin of error is only 2%. Like, what's the likelihood that, if this doesn't work or your interest rate just go up, I say your return is gone already, So there's not enough cushioning for and there's not just not enough cushion for you to actually even consider that structure, because it's a stupid structure, right? I mean, common sense would dictate lah. But for some reason, these university graduates cannot do numbers. I find it disturbing. Okay. Anyway, besides that, besides that, right, I also say that the way I like to look at it is from a business perspective, and that is, if let's say my borrowing cost is about 3 to 4%, but if let's say the investment idea, right, I average a return of, let's say, 30 to 40% per year for the next 10 years, that gives me a super healthy margin. That even if it doesn't hit 30-40%, let's say I just take half. Okay, if it gets me 15%, right, and then my cost is only 3 to 4%, and if the structure is fixed, right, then I'll take that bet. It's no issue for me, correct or not? Because I got a super healthy margin. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is how the way I see like how to make that work for you. And that is when you take that debt, there needs to be a super healthy margin, right, for you as the person who borrow money to actually like make sure that if shit hits the fan, that you have enough leeway for you to get out as unscathed, right? And this is very problematic, because the problem is that most people, when they borrow money, they put money into very shitty amount of error. Is just not enough to cover like maximum loss lah. So it's very similar to when you do a business, right? When you want to bring a product to market, right? Like you want to bring a product to market. Let's say you want to do drop shipping on Shopee. You bring a product to, let's say, Singapore or Malaysia, then you sell it on Shopee, right? Do you want to bring a product where the margin is like 10%, or do you want to bring a product where the margin is 10x?
And that's a 10x, right?
Yeah.
Obviously you will prefer 10x. Obviously the 10x margin product, most likely the cost per unit is probably lesser lah. It's probably like, instead of like $500 for one unit, you probably have to sell 10 times the volume lah. But in many cases, this is what I mean by having a margin of error. When you borrow money, you need to come from a perspective that you are borrowing money, and you have to treat yourself like a business, and you have to make sure there's enough margin and cushioning, right, in case shit hits the fan. And I find it very disturbing, right, that in the 2020 like COVID crash, so many youngsters, I'm not talking about people in the 30s, talking about people in like the early to mid 20s. They just started their first career, they're just happy get their first paycheck, work for 1-2 years, then the tech boom, a lot of them make like they make good money lah. So it's like, it's very disturbing for me to see all these young people come up to me and then present to me amazingly shitty ideas, where the margin of error is so thin, or even worse, even if let's say the margin of error is considered big, right? But when you look at the structure of the idea, it's fundamentally flawed. Like I give the very good example is the Luna and Terra. Nobody like actually no one factored in that there was a potential for it to go to zero.
Yeah, absolutely nobody actually.
Like me and Ryan, you and me for the longest time when we're talking about DeFi, right, in our channels, we have already like excessively told everyone, right, that there is a small chance that the DeFi project that you invest in can go to zero. I think we have made it very, very explicit, and then we get attacked and slammed for it.
Yeah.
So it's like, guys, what you want us to do? Like we say this cannot, we don't say anything also cannot. So when I mean, you get what I mean lah. So it's like when you don't borrow money, right, and you invest like cash, and then you lose money, I would say that it's okay because you just lose money, you can earn back. But what is very tough, right, is that when you borrow money, and then you invest into things, right, where fundamentally, it is a flawed investment, and there lies the very thin silver lining, because most people get confused between investing and gambling.
Mm.
Right. And that is something that I think most people really need to take a step back, and before they borrow huge sums of money, right, to take a step back, and ask themselves whether or not they're gambling or whether or not they're investing. Because investing, right, is you coming from a perspective where Steph has already described. She knows her numbers, she knows her market, she knows her competitors, and she can foresee 5, 10, 15, 20 years whether or not what are the pitfalls, what are the ups and what are the downs, what are the sideways markets. She can see all that because she has done her due diligence. Gambling, on the other hand, is basically when Lambo syndrome.
Yeah, Lambo when.
Yeah, and then whenever you throw like questions like whether or not this can work or things like that, basically they just say, oh, fart, which is not a very good answer, I would say. So fundamentally, how do you make that work for you? Have a very healthy margin when you borrow money. Either you buy below market cost, or make sure that the margin of the interest rate, right, is so big that even if, let's say, your projected like return gets cut in half, right, it still can cover that interest that you borrow in. And most importantly, when you borrow debt, right, especially if it's a collateral debt, especially like crypto, right, this stupid like online exchanges like to offer you like Steph, you mentioned it's like 90% loan, right? In crypto, you don't borrow 90%, you can borrow up to 100 times your capital.
Wow.
So it's
Yeah.
like you put $1, you can borrow up to $100,
Yes.
You put in $1, you can borrow up to $100. So it's like all it needs, right, is just 1% drop, your entire capital gets wiped out. And as you know, crypto move up and down. 1% is like basically 5 minutes, like 5 minutes like action. So it all stems back from, as what Ryan likes to mention, is good financial prudency. You need to really step back, do the interest rate analysis, which I really find that most people just don't do, and then also make sure that you have a healthy margin of cushioning, to make sure that even if shit hits the ceiling, right, you can afford the debt, and make sure that you don't overextend. Yeah, that's the key thing.
All right.
And okay, sorry, the last one I forgot to mention. If you're very scared and that, and it's your first time taking on debt, right, I would say just start small. Don't start so big. Yeah, start very small. Like start maybe like you can start a small credit card, like maybe 500 ringgit a month or 500 sing a month, something that's manageable. Then once you get the hang of it, once you're very comfortable, right, then you can start to scale up your debt higher and higher. But that's how I would do it, because it's not very wise for most people to get into such a huge debt position, right, without first understanding the fundamentals of debt. So you can start small. Don't have to start so big. Start small first.
All right. Yeah, it's just a matter of getting used to managing your cash flow in a sense, because with debt, right, you do have to pay off, and then you do have to factor in like next month, do I have enough money to actually pay off the credit card loan or not? Looking back at like why my father actually pushed me into buying a car with a higher purchase loan, right, it was actually to build a habit of like managing my cash flow, which I look back now, it was a good lesson, but a painful one. But nowadays, I do manage my credit card debt and my high purchase loan debt and everything quite effectively. I do have like a couple of like credit card loan debts going on, and yeah, you just have to have like all these numbers in your head and like be prepared to pay for it next month. But I would say like credit card debt and like high purchase loan or fixed rate loans, right? These are generally more simple loans where you don't have to factor in the interest rates and all. For like the mortgage loans and all, it will be next level, where you have to start thinking about like sensitivity analysis, where you have to take into account whether your interest rates are going to go up or not, and if it is, then how much would it need to go up before you start to fail to pay your debt. And that would actually create a pretty bad track record down the road.
Oh,
So
great.
I would just like to ask you guys, right, to create a good track record with your debts, how do you actually want to do it? Or rather, like the topic that we're going to go into is like creating a good track record to draw down debt. So maybe like Aaron, you might want to like just start rolling the ball here.
As what Steph has mentioned consistently in her channel, guys, pay your taxes.
Yeah, I
Like,
think Stephanie mentioned that just now, right? Like hire like a good tax consultant to do it, build the credibility.
yeah, like I think what I like about Stephanie is that she always consistently always like gives out the message that it is very important for most people to be honest about their tax filings. Because I think that as a capitalist and as a business person, right, it is very important that you pay your due taxes in due. Like, don't try and cheat the system. Don't try and circumvent the system. You can make the taxation efficient, but actually, if you actually like zoom out and look at the bigger picture, right? Most of the time, the people who are the best position to take advantage of the financial system are the people who always pay their taxes in the most transparent way possible. So I would say that the fundamental principle that most people must have is that just pay your taxes, because honestly, if you pay your taxes, basically you're displaying your income for them to see, right? So, and then if it's very consistent and then you're growing your income, the likelihood that the banks will allow you to borrow money, because you have displayed consistent like income, right? And usually when they want to lend you money, the first thing that they always ask, very simple, can you please show me your tax return, right? Because you can show them payslip, you can show them monthly payslip, you can show them yearly payslip, but the most credible source of income that a bank can get, right, is show me your income tax. Because when you do an income tax, it is very hard for you to run away, right? How much you declare your income. So I think a lot of people, right, are usually missing the big picture when they want to reduce their income tax, and that is, I want to pay as little as possible, which is quite stupid in my opinion. Because honestly, if you want to really like grow and build your wealth, you will do it a lot better with the bank's help. And the way that the bank can help you is that you be honest about your tax filing and just pay your share of the tax, which I think personally I have advocated that, I think, in my entire like business career, and that is, it's best that you just pay your taxes, have a very good track record on making sure that you file your taxes due properly. And if you need a tax consultant, hire one, because they will make sure that they can display your finances the best, so that when you walk up to a bank, right, and a bank asks for documentation, you have it, and you have a track record of showing that you have that you basically have your shit together, end of the day. And of course, like building credit by itself, once you have showcased that you have income, right, through reliable sources, then usually the bank will start to give you credit facility. And the first credit facility that most people want to have is their credit card. So generally, once you have a credit card, then you have displayed that you're able to use your credit card reliably. All right, then the next thing you go is a personal loan. Right, then after your personal loan, and you have demonstrated that you know how to manage it properly, right, then generally once your income starts to go higher and higher, then you'll be in the sophisticated investor or high net worth individual level. Then once you reach that level, right, then basically the options for borrowing opens up even more, because then you basically have options for sophisticated structures which opens up to you. Banks are a lot. Put it this way, guys. If you want to build a very credible like credit rating, right, pay your taxes and make sure that you don't otang people and don't run away from creditors. End of the day, banks, they like to work with people who are honest about their finances. So the more honest you are, the better for you. And I believe that is the best way to go around it, lah.
All right, I guess I'll just also pass the mic over to Stephanie to ask, like, aside from like building credibility through paying taxes that you mentioned just now, is there any other way to actually build like a good track record of like your credit scores, and also the integrity or the credibility of a person through debt, mortgages, or any other way?
Because in Malaysia, the bank will usually look at your CRIS, which is the credit information collection by the Bank Negara Malaysia lah. So I think that's very important, is to not miss your monthly repayment, even including your PTPTN or even your mobile phone bills as well. So I think you can automate payment to be a better paymaster. Yeah. So and other than that, I think is to up your income as well, because as you up your income, you also get to be a better credit profile a person with better credit profile in the eyes of the bank or financial institution.
Right. So just to sum it up, right, it's to pay your taxes. It's to utilize those credit systems like your credit card, debt, but do pay your installments, your mortgages on time. Don't miss a payment. And finally, just to increase your income overall, so you become more highly accredited person in the eyes of financial institutions. All right, thanks for sharing, guys. We've covered mostly what we wanted to talk about today. For the final section of the podcast, let's move on to the Q&A section. The first question, I believe it was from Stephanie, right?
Yes.
So, this question is, where are we heading to if debt continues to rise and property prices keeps going up? So maybe like you want to like expand a little bit on this question before we answer, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, because being in the property industry, right, I really do see or like feel worried, especially for the younger generation. If if the property price continues to rise, like what will happen? And also as people take on more and more debts because maybe they do not know about the implications of debt, and that, yeah, you get cash back and stuff like that. But there surely is an end to it. There surely is some consequences. That's why I wanted to get some input or opinions from you guys, where you see this going to.
I think I can just give like a speculative input, but I'm not entirely sure what I'm about to say is true or not, because it sounds like I'm channeling my inner Michael Burry. But I hate to do this, but I feel like when the property market is kind of like propped up by credit, right? Majority, like if you take a look at Clan Valley, a lot of them are like ghost townships, ghost office towers that I mentioned. The occupancy rate is so bad, and I'm just not sure where all the money is coming from. So probably it's all coming from the bank. Or what happens one day if the bank fails? It's going to be like a 08, 09 crisis. And as all this, even if it doesn't happen, right, which is good in a sense that it doesn't cripple the economy, it's still bad for the people who want to buy, or like the millennials in general who wants to buy homes for the sake of staying in them. It becomes unaffordable to the point you have to rent. But what happens when everyone is forced to rent? Rentals will go up, and it's just an endless downward spiral that I see, Aaron, maybe you want like chime in?
There's a saying in the investment world, right, that when the tide goes down, you'll see who's swimming naked. To basically like to give you a very good example, I hate to use the same example over and over again, and that is to look at the Luna Terra crash that occurred last week. You realize that there were many people, right, who actually invested money that wasn't theirs into a project which was speculative, right? And usually, from my experience, in reading, many books about investing, I'm like freaking nerd when it comes to like investment history, lah. I've read all the way from the 1800s, 1900s, the year 2000. Usually, when housing becomes to a level, right, where it is unaffordable and people cannot buy house, two things usually happen. Either the income is artificially depressed, or the houses are artificially high. So one thing has got to give. Is either the income needs to go up, or the property price will probably sideline and go sideways for a prolonged period of time. All right. I would say that, if people are feeling the pain, then what will usually happen is that people will start to rent instead of buy, because it's no longer a question of whether which is better, but a question of whether or not I can even afford it. And if people cannot afford to buy a flat, right, then they'll just rent. I mean, end of the day, that is the only solution, the only option they have. So supply demand will come and kick in, right? Then the question is how long can this like musical chairs continue before something gives out. So unfortunately, I'm not in the property market in Malaysia for me to make a very like reasonable assessment. But my assessment in Singapore is that I don't think it's an overinflated bubble yet. Because our government is very good at making sure that they remove the pressure away from the prices so that it doesn't become unaffordable. Right, but I would say that as a person who has jumped across cities in Southeast Asia, I can completely relate to what Ryan mentioned about ghost towns. Because talking about ghost towns, this is exactly right what happened to China this year for Evergrande. Because they realized that the house of cards start falling down. And overnight, right, people who purchase property are hoping that the property will be complete in 5 years. I realized, right, that they overpaid for the house and the house delivery might take more than 5 years to come. And they throw in 2 to 3 generations of wealth in that one house. And if something like that can happen to a country where a GDP is $18 trillion, you don't talk about countries which are smaller. That's what I'm saying. If a country of that size, of that magnitude, you can see such a huge deflation happen so quickly in a matter of months. Don't even talk about smaller countries. Right. This is not the first time that Southeast Asia has seen such massive deflationary asset bubble, because we did go through one in 1997, 1998, 1999, where you see in Southeast Asia, right, the Singapore stock market, I think, fell by 80 to 90%. Your Bursa fell by 90%. Your currency got halved by 50%. Indonesia, the stock market fell by 95%. Their currency also fell by 80, 90%. So whatever happened in Russia during the Ukraine crisis, right, actually occurred in every single country in Southeast Asia, including Singapore. So all I can say is, how do you best defend yourself against this type of things, End of the day, it comes back down to make sure that whatever you buy within your means. And make sure that you buy at a value which is fair to you, and try your best not to overpay. Because end of the day, right, whether or not this becomes manageable always stems from the fact that it needs to be manageable in size. I always say it's better to buy something within your means than to overstretch and then realize later, even if the property drops by 50%, you still owe the other remaining 50%. Be prudent, that's what I'm saying. So,
And also, like, I want to chime in, right? Like, never ever factor in your future cash flow growth into your analysis. Like, whatever you earn now is how much it's better just to make your analysis based on whatever you can pay now. Because naturally, yes, everyone would have their salaries increase and all, but what happens if you lose your job tomorrow? You're not able to pay, or you have to take a pay cut, like everyone during COVID, 20-30% pay cuts. So it was a difficult time for everyone. Some weren't able to pay their housing mortgages, but fortunately our government did have like a loan memorandum, but I'm not even sure if I pronounced it correctly, but there's like a moratorium that everyone stopped paying their loans for 6 months, which was great. But in the end of the day, you still have to pay your debt, and just never ever do your analysis based on your future salary or whatever projections you think your salary growth would be, or how much you would earn in the future. Because what truly matters is what you can pay now.
Yep. And I would like to chime in as well, because I've also read about news like how Singapore is so well regulated that there's no such thing as markup or cashback in the property scene. And because there was a case that one developer actually did that in Singapore, and it was brought to it was brought to court. So that actually shows how prudent the Singapore government is as compared to the Malaysia one. So I really want to let people know that to be very careful with cashback, because cashback in the end of the day, it's being paid by the buyer, not the developer, and it actually really kind of affect the overall market value, and really makes it make the property market so much even more not transparent. Meaning to say, when a developer push up the value artificially, then the JPPH, which is our Valuation and Property Services Department, the government one, they will really find it hard to gauge the real price of the property in the area. As for property, right, really don't buy into a property because of the cashback, because I'm seeing, there's cashback promotion, although not being promoted out, but being done more like backdoor. But really I want to get like buyer to really consider before making that decision, because in the end they will have to pay for the cashback no matter how tempting it is lah. Because at the end of the day, if they buy artificially inflated price property, it will even make it harder for like the valuation and property services department of Malaysia to really determine the real value of the property, especially like in specific areas. So, and then the price will be continue being pushed up until making the the market eventually become unaffordable for so many people, and so it will be continuously being manipulated and create this artificial increase in price lah. But then because of the willing buyer, willing seller scenario, so it continues to goes up and up lah. So I find that people need to be aware of the consequences.
Oh, well, that's very interesting. It sounds like the market's like super inefficient in the sense that
Yeah,
the,
because
the prices
yeah,
just keep going up.
because eventually, right, the JPPH, which is the Valuation and Property Services Department, they will base on the last transacted price, which is on the sales and purchase agreement. They won't know whether it's manipulated or not. Only the buyer know, only the seller know. So they will eventually based on that to determine, okay, so this is the current market value of that area, for example. So it will continue be up and up if it's artificially being inflated.
Oof.
Yeah, so there's a consequences that I see that people are not aware of. They are just thinking, oh, I get cash back, I got extra cash, but not knowing actually there's a bigger consequences for that as well lah.
Yeah, that's definitely a red flag there that not many people actually talk about. So thank you for sharing this today, Stephanie.
No
We
Yeah,
were
worries.
just
really
talking
appreciate
about
it.
like me and Eric, we were just talking like all these things, right? You don't if you're not like in the property scene, you just don't know. And like when you know about it, it's just so scary to
Yeah.
even think about it.
Yeah, so yeah, if you are in the industry, you will be more careful with the whatever marketing thing that people do lah in the industry.
Definitely. That's a good one to watch out for.
Yeah.
All right. Next on to the next question. So this one's an interesting one. How to avoid housing loan debt?
Mhm.
I mean, if you buy a house, there's 99.5% that you're gonna take a mortgage. It's kind of unaffordable. So I would say instead of like how to avoid a housing loan, it's better to be like prudent in when taking on a mortgage. Would you agree with that, Aaron?
The only way to avoid a housing loan is to either pay cash or you just rent.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
Right. Really,
definitely.
Yep.
these are really like the only two ways to do it. And if you can afford to pay cash, the likelihood that you don't want to take that is quite low, lah, I would say. Because I think we have already explained the podcast. I think for most people who can afford to pay 100% down, I think you are in a financial position to negotiate very, very hard with your banker to make sure they get a damn good rate. Because the banker know you can pay. So if the
Yeah.
banker know you can pay and you have cash to pay, then the likelihood that they give you a very good deal is very high because you probably belong to high net worth or sophisticated investor, right? So and then like the other side of the equation, which also ties back to the question of what will happen if the property price and rental becomes unaffordable. I would say that eventually what's going to happen is that people vote with their feet, essentially. Like eventually, if let's say right that the opportunities are not there for you to live in a sustainable way, then eventually people will move out of the country and you will see brain drain, right? Because let's say like your property is really super unaffordable, people really cannot, it's literally hand to mouth, people cannot afford anything, then there's lack of opportunity in the area for you to be able to live a standard of living. If people will move, if people can move and get a better standard of living elsewhere, they will do so, right? So in many ways, I would say that one of the benefits about renting, right, is that you don't actually tie yourself to one location. You can actually go anywhere around the world, provided that you have good visas and good relocation opportunities, right, where you're able to also arbitrage on the geographical location, So coming back to the question, like how do you avoid housing loan debt? I guess it's really more of a lifestyle question you have to ask yourself lah. Are you the type of person who prefers to stay in one area for the rest of your life, or are you the type of person who prefers to rotate in and out states, cities, countries for the rest of your life? Because if you're a person who prefers to stay in one location, then sometimes it makes sense for you to have a housing loan debt, right? But whereas if you're a person like me who likes to like go to multiple cities, in my lifetime, right? I think that taking a housing loan debt should only come if I intend to have a family, I intend to root somewhere. Yeah, because when you buy a house, you're basically like putting yourself up in a place to stay lah. So you have to answer that question. So these are really like the only two ways lah. It's either you pay out 100% cash, which in most cases I don't think that's what you will do. Eventually you're still going to have a housing loan debt. Then the other one is a lifestyle question, or whether or not you prefer to rent. How about you, Steph?
I would say to make use of the bank packages, find something that will work for you. Like for me, example, I'm using the flexi loan now. So and I can see that this using of flexi loan is picking up, especially among millennials that are more and more financially literate. So I find you may want to explore on that. And yeah, I mean, if really you want to avoid housing debt and you want to choose to not have it at all and to rent instead, I really find there's no harm in doing that lah. Because I've also done the calculation myself and to show myself actually renting is not that bad one. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like,
I love that.
where does the shame come from renting? I don't understand. Like you rent, you can invest in equities. That's cool and all. But what's
Yeah.
the nicer part also is like you can also move houses every 2 or 3 years, Once your tenure is up, you don't want to live, you feel like the place you're living is a shithole, then you can move somewhere else, move to a new neighborhood, the nicer neighborhood, There's the flexibility there. But whereas if you go into a housing loan, then you're stuck with the same home. If it's like a shit home, then you're stuck with the shit home for like the rest of your life
Yeah.
until you actually sell it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's really uncommon. It's not uncommon to see really like wealthy people that are actually living in a rented home as well. It's really not uncommon. So I really find there's no shame with renting, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess we need to start a motion to throw away this idea that you need to own a house, and not owning a house is shameful.
Yeah.
I mean, look, like we always go back to the key fundamental principle. Owning a house is really just an insurance policy, right? To ensure that in 25 years you don't have to pay rent, right? Basically, you just front load your rental of in your retirement towards 25 years, then, and basically it's really an insurance policy if you think about it, right? So like I don't think that people should feel ashamed if they rent, because I think personally, I've always been a big believer in renting. I don't really like to buy homes because it's not my game and cup of tea, but I will not discount it if I intend to have kids, because I think sometimes you also need to put some value into the ownership. If let's say I intend to have like 3 or 5 kids, right? I want 3 or 5 kids. I think it makes sense for me to own a home, because I think if I want to consistently shift house, especially when I have like 3 to 5 kids, right? I think it's going to be tough lah.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very very tough. If I have like 3 to 5 kids, like then each of them, every time I relocate, then have to change school, they have to change education system, then it's going to be very tough for the family lah. So like if you intend to like settle down and have kids, right, then I think it's okay if you're just a couple don't have kids lah. But once you have kids, right, I think the thought process, right, of wanting to root down is basically out of like convenience and also time. So like so I think you have to keep that in mind because different people, right, they have different like perspectives when it comes to like buying and renting lah. In your early, mid, late and early 30s, you might think that renting is the way to go. But from my experience, what I've learned is that as people start to age, their perspective can change because the needs in their life changes, right? They might not want to have kids in their 20s, but maybe in their mid 30s they have baby fever. Then how, right? Then your needs change already, right? Then you'll start to think of like of different reasons why property would make sense. Because if you have kids and then if your kids need to go to school, right, then it makes sense for you to root in one particular area lah. So the cost that you pay, right, it's not just on the investment return that you get and the hedge that you get, but also out of the time savings which you can get if you root yourself to one particular place.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, agree.
I mean, like
Oh.
for me, I would say for property, right? I would tend to look at it as buying a property out of needs to serve the need to actually have a roof over your head. And like some people, it's a goal in life, which I don't think it's a bad thing. Like having a dream home to relax and unwind is actually a very nice thing also. And it feels a lot different when you know you own the place and there's this sense of success that you actually paid for the place and built your dream home. I won't dispute that. That's if that's your life goal, that's a 100% respectable one that I will respect. But in the sense that if it's like for investments, I would kind of like argue that it's a bit of an inefficient I mean no offense, but like I do think it's like a bit inefficient compared to crypto and stocks. But yeah, you do you. If it's like part of your circle of competence, then just go ahead.
I think the key thing is also the amount that you need to put up lah for property. It's really like the only way you can do it is really like leveraging, right? Because like the amount of money that you need to start in property is quite high. You cannot dispute that the amount, the outlay is high, and not only that, right? That puts you in a position of vulnerability. Because if you're talking about like putting up such a huge debt amount and then it takes like 30% of your cash flow, then it starts to limit your options in what else you can do with your money.
Definitely, it trims away a lot of your cash flow. Maybe you could spend like a lot more on groceries compared to like when you're renting compared to when you're actually paying for a mortgage, or you need to save up for the amount of like down payment that you're going to make, the initial 10%. Yeah, it's all just boils back down to just good personal finance and whether it actually serves your needs or not. But like what Aaron said, your priorities will change in your 30s. If you have a kid, it might be something on the plate where you want to buy a place, settle down, have kids where they attend a school at the same area, you know. But yeah, I just still don't think from investing perspective it's a feasible one, if that makes sense. But that's just me. No offense to anyone else.
Okay,
Yeah,
the next one is sorry, Steph.
no, no. I mean, I actually get where Ryan is going on, because sometimes when we take on debts, like for example for property investment, the rental that we make, that we earn may not be able to cover the monthly installment. So that's where one thing that we need to consider, there is such possibilities. So yeah, that's why I wouldn't disagree that property investment may not be the best investment, and to remain open-minded to other types of investment as well. Yeah.
Coming back and shooting myself, I should also be more open-minded for property. I won't dispute that there's alpha there. So, but it's just not my circle of competence. That's why
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, on to the next question. So, if interest rates are all going up, do I take a mortgage loan now or later? Maybe Steph, you wanna talk a little bit about this?
How should I go with this? For me, in my opinion, I think it's to get now if possible. Why? Because I'm looking at the property market clock, the property clock. So we are at the bottom, coming up now. So what I wouldn't encourage people to do is to buy at the top of the market. But since we are still quite at the bottom now, before it gets back up, if you really need to buy a house, I would say really consider the options you have now instead of later. Because why? And another reason is because me coming from a property development background as well. I see construction costs being increased a lot, and developers are going through pressures to increase price. Okay, so there's no way that they can reduce price when the cost is increasing 20-30% and even 50, because of the labor shortage, as well as like the steel price going up and the construction materials. So it's really hard to say, and it's better not to time the market as well, because based on trend, we are still like at the bottom but coming back up soon or even now. So I think it's good to take the opportunity. Let's say if you really need to buy a house now. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to say that I really like what Stephanie mentioned just now. Don't try to time the market. For any investment really, I would say if you want to buy, the best time is probably now. That's like a very famous quote from Warren Buffett as well. Because yeah, just you don't time the market because you still need to do your homework. You still need to find your undervalued property, or in the case of like equities, you still need to do your valuations and stuff like that. And in the end of the day, you're invested only when you put your money down, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Aaron, you got anything to add in?
I think Stephanie is the best person to answer this in terms of now or later, because she's inside the field, right? And I like that she actually comes across from a perspective that construction costs are going up, because usually that kind of tells me that underlying the fundamentals means that this price increase is due to construction costs going up and not credit going up. You get what I mean? If that makes sense. Because if the price increase is due to basically like leverage, right, then usually it's not sustainable, especially if the interest rate increase. But if it's due to material costs going up by 20 to 30%, then I would say that you just need to be prudent in the purchase price that you pay lah. And also I like that actually what Steph really comes home with, right, is that you're buying it because you need it and a utility and something which you have been looking for in a long time, right? If you have been looking for a property for a while, then actually, to be honest, property up, property down, so long as you keep to the key tenets, like what we mentioned on podcast, right? 30% of your income, cash flow, assess the market place and make sure you try to get fair value. The best is below market price, and be open to like subsale if you can, because like as what she has mentioned, there's value in there. And the way that I see property is I don't usually see it as a growth play, but more of a value play, meaning you try to, if you want to have the biggest cost savings ever, try to get it as cheap as possible, because there will be buyers who unfortunately they had to let go properties at a cheap price lah. So I think like unfortunately this is the game of like value investing lah. You have to look for distressed sellers, then you basically like buy the property for cheap, because unfortunately this is how the game is played. So in terms of buying now or later, I would say that in every single market, up, down, left, right, there's always people who make money, right? In a market crash, a lot of hedge funds, they make triple digit returns. In a market upswing, there's also funds who make a lot of money, and likewise there's many funds who also lose money in a up market, and funds that lose a lot of money in a down market. So I think end of the day, what it really stems back down, right, is due diligence and also time in the market. Because essentially, if you try to time the market, you just need to understand that time in the market only really matters, I think, in the short term, about 3-6 months, maybe 1 year. But if you actually like really zoom out and you look at time frames of like 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 years, right, what you're going to realize, the main reason why markets in general and asset price go up is quite simple, and that ties back to our first episode of this podcast called the fiat standard, and that is currencies through time and space are just very terrible places to hold value using cash. In Singapore we see inflation, in Malaysia we see inflation, and I can say over the years, what I've noticed and what I've realized is that the market is just designed to go up because unfortunately, people work better in an inflationary environment because it forces people to spend money. Because if you are in a deflationary environment, then you basically the same scenario is you look in Japan, that's what you're going to get. Basically, for the last like 20, 30 years, right, you realize that the country has not changed much because of the spectacular crash, and they basically just become hermit mode for like 20, 30 years. Right. So I think like observing many like scenarios and like macro environments, I've just come to the realization that inflationary environment tend to be the better solution, over historical basis. And the best way that you can counter inflationary environments, right, is to basically make sure that you put your money to work as actively as you can at a risk profile and a risk tolerance, right, which appeals to you, be it in equities, be it in crypto, be it in real estate. Essentially, try not to hold cash beyond your emergency fund requirements. As much as possible, you will want to utilize cash because that is the best way that you can get to get the return. Because essentially, if you look at very rich people and very wealthy individuals and businessmen, what are they very good at? They are very good at deploying capital. And that is what personal finance is. Personal finance essentially is learning how to deploy capital against your other opponent, which is inflation. If you're able to get good at deploying capital with the help of that, then I think in most cases you will do quite well.
All right. So before we end the session, do we have any like closing remarks, Stephanie?
Well, when it comes to property, it can be you can make a data-driven decision as well when it comes to property, whether you're buying for your own stay or for investment. So yeah, use that and don't make impulsive decision. And yeah, I think that's all for me.
All right. Aaron, how about you?
Definitely follow Steffi Kondo on her Instagram. That's all I can say because amongst my many years of like looking at property, right, I think she's one of the rare few who actually really does come across as a very balanced view when it comes to property lah. Because essentially I always look for professionals. Good professionals are hard to find. I feel in many areas, and sometimes when you find a person who's very balanced in the way of doing things right, then I think that you would want the person's influence, and because you can ask their views and I think Stephanie is one of them because I do like her views in terms of the property market. Yeah, that's why we have her in the podcast today. And also for my end, I guess learn how to manage that, learn how to use it wisely, and learn how to utilize the 50% of your balance sheet. Because if you do it well, right, generally you will be better off than people who actually 100% stay away from that. So I think it's best that people learn how to get comfortable with it instead of avoiding it completely.
Awesome. So for me, again, I echo Aaron's views on like how Stephanie has like a very balanced view on like property itself. I see that she comes from like a point of view where she does take into account data and that there's always very data driven decisions coming from her account. So do go follow her account at Steffi Condo at Instagram, which I can say her content is very, very valuable to the property investor. And also in terms of like debt, I would say like try to understand it. Don't let it be something, don't let it be a financial instrument that you don't understand because it is whatever you're in, equities, crypto, property, it's going to be a huge part of the market. Even if you're not buying property, you are still somewhat connected to debt. Like we haven't even really touched on like national debts like GDP, that kind of stuff today, but it is all interconnected and it's something that should be understood and not feared. And also thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today. We really enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thanks,
much for
Steph.
both of you as well, Aaron and Ryan.
Yeah, and also like thank you, Aaron, for the masterclass on like depth. Because like right before we started the podcast, I was saying today is going to be like a masterclass on depth.
I
And
Yeah.
tried.
it is. But
Yes.
yeah, until the next episode, thanks for tuning in and invest safe, friends. See you.